Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, you are going to learn how to use PyQt5 as well as QTDesigner while building 4 different Python GUI projects. So you are going to learn by example. As we build these 4 different projects together, I will walk you through each step by step. So we will talk about every single thing in these projects. So even if you are a complete beginner to PyQt5, you've never used it in your life, you can watch this video, and then by the end of the video you should be comfortable with the PyQt5 basics as well as some intermediate parts. So without further ado, let's get started and let me give you an overview of the different projects that we have. So the projects will look like this. There will be 4 different apps. Now each app will get progressively more and more complex and more difficult. So these are 4 beginner projects, but they will get more and more difficult as you go through the video. And you will learn PyQt5 as well as QTDesigner using these projects. Then we will also learn how to integrate external libraries and APIs with our applications to make them more advanced and build some really cool things. The only requirement I ask of you is that you have PyQt5 and QtDesigner installed. And this thumbnail that you see right here is a thumbnail of a very old video that I have, and you can refer to that if you want to see how you can install them. The video is very short. You can install them both in just 2 steps, so I do recommend you go pause, watch that, and then come back here. Alright, now what do the projects look like? The first one will allow you to get familiar with some basic widgets. So you will build a checklist, which you can have your to-dos inside of it. And through this, you will learn the basics of PyQt5 and QtDesigner. So you will learn how to create a UI with the QtDesigner tool, how you can load this UI file into Python, and how you can use these basic widgets from PyQt5 in your first application. You will also apply some styling to make it look these different colors, the blue that you see right here and maybe the font. So you will see how that goes in the first part of the video. Now, after you have learned the basic widgets and now you're familiar with PyQt5 and QtDesigner, you will then use and learn about the QTableWidget. So the QTableWidget allows you to show data. This is very useful if you have tons of data in a database or maybe an Excel file. So here we're going to use an Excel sheet, and then we're going to load all of our data from the Excel sheet into the QTableWidget. So this is the application that you see right here. Of course, the application is still going to be discussed in a very beginner-friendly manner. I will show you everything step by step. We're going to use an external library here as well. This is the openpyxl library. This enables you to use Excel with Python. So this is really good if you want to automate certain tasks, and it's really helpful skill to have for the future. So we'll load the Excel file data and add this data into the table that you see right here. Alright, so now we've practiced using PyQt5, some widgets, the table widget, we've used an external library. Here we're going to use an external API. This API, we will use it to send emails. So here we will have an email sender. As you can see, there is a recipient. This is where you would write the email of the person that you're emailing, as well as the body. So here in the body, you would write your actual email. Then you will send it using an external API, and you will see this email in your very real inbox. So I do suggest you also try this one out, because here you're actually using something more advanced, which is an API, and you can add this project to your resume because it's a bit more complex. Now, step 4, the most advanced project that we have, we are going to build a text editor. So here I say email sender. This is actually a text editor, my bad, that's a typo on my end. Here you're going to learn about more and more advanced widgets. So you can see we have this menu bar, you will have this file, new, open, save, save as. These will each have their different functionalities. There will be others as well. You will also create both a light mode and a dark mode. So essentially in this project, we are going to recreate Notepad. Then we're also going to learn about file management with PyQt5 using the Q file dialogues to open files, write new stuff, save these files. So it's a really well-rounded and complex project that you can also add to your resume. So these are the 4 projects we are going to build today. I have compiled this footage from previous videos, but I do hope that this video all in all will help you progress with PyQt5, learn it, and build 4 different projects and get familiar with the tool. Alright, without further ado, let's get started with the very first project. I'm going to show you how to create this very simple checklist using PyQt5. So we're going to create this sort of to-do list or checklist. You can use it as either a to-do or anything else, where you can check and uncheck different items on your checklist. We also are going to create a toggle all button, which is going to toggle the checks or unchecks. So here, if I leave it like this, and as you can see, we have 3 checked and 2 unchecked. If I press on toggle all, it's going to flip all of the checks. This will enable us to actually see how we can manipulate the different checkboxes and the list widget using our Python code. What we're going to do is we're going to design this using QTDesigner. We'll design the first interface. Then we're going to actually use Python to write the code to call it, load it, and manipulate it as well. Finally, we're going to reformat it so it looks as you can see right now on the screen. Now, this video is totally beginner friendly. I'm going to walk you through everything related to PyQt5 and how you can actually execute it. However, the one thing I won't talk about is installing PyQt5 and QtDesigner. I already have a video for that, so just feel free to check that out. It's a very short video. As soon as you have PyQt5 and QtDesigner installed, we can get started and you can follow along with this one. So without further ado, let's just get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to use QTDesigner to create this interface. So as you can see, I have a starter interface in front of me. This is a main.ui file. So .ui files are a special type of files which we're going to use in order to manually create our interface using this drag and drop interface, which is QTDesigner. Now, how do you go about creating this exact same interface? Let me walk you through it step by step. So first, you're just going to go to File, New. Now, if you have just opened up QTDesigner, this dialog right here should be shown as soon as you open it up. Otherwise, just press File, New, as I just showed you. Then what you're going to do, you want to select Main Window. So our application has one window, and this window is the main window. So this is of type Q main window. So I'm just going to select it, and then I'm going to go ahead and press on Create. This opens up this main window that is right here. For now, it's untitled. And as you can see, there are different components in the object inspector, so different objects inside this main window. So in PyQt5, this sort of works as a hierarchy. The main window itself is a large container. Then inside it, you have the central widget. So this is the central widget, this area with the dots that you see right here. This will contain all your other widgets. So this will contain the checklist, the button, and any other widgets that you choose to add. Otherwise, you also have the menu bar and the status bar. So the menu bar is this top part and the status bar is the bottom part. So I'm just going to right click and remove them because for this video, we're not actually going to use either the menu bar nor the status bar. Now that I've removed them, I only have my central widget inside the object inspector. So this is pretty similar to the UI I have right here, except that it's obviously much larger and it doesn't have the different components. So it doesn't have the 2 widgets that you see right here. The first widget we're actually going to need is this list widget. So not list view, it's the list widget. So I'm just going to drag it onto my screen. And as you can see, this is the list widget. It looks kind of similar. They're both blank squares. So for now, you don't actually really see anything or any difference. And the next thing we're going to need is a push button. So I'm just going to scroll here and go to input widgets. There we go. And I'm going to find the push button. Where is the push button? Oh, there it is. In the buttons, sorry, not the input widget. So the push button is right here. Okay, so now that I've dragged the push button, you can see that I have sort of the 2 things that you have in the first interface as well. I'm going to come here, I'm going to actually relabel this button. I'm going to say toggle all so that we build a sort of interface that's very similar to the first one. Now, one key difference you can see is that this one is sort of resized in a much neater way, and this one is sort of still messy. Another thing is if we go ahead and preview, so you can go here to Form, Preview, or you can just press Ctrl R. This is the same shortcut. You preview, this launches our interface. This is the way Python is going to see it. So it's a preview of how the interface will look like when we execute the code and we load it using Python. So as you can see, still messy. It's definitely not responsive or resizable. It's a very basic interface. Now, on the other hand, if I go back to the first UI and I go ahead and I preview this one, you can see that obviously it looks much better, but also if you resize it, it's resizable and it's responsive, as you increase and decrease the screen. So as I grow it and I shrink it, you can see that the interface changes. Obviously, this is much nicer and much neater, and it's a great advantage whenever we want to create an interface. So I'm going to come back to this one, and I'm going to show you how you can get the exact same result, make it responsive and resizable, just like the first interface. So I can just right click, go to layout, and I'm going to choose layout in a grid. So here, layout in a grid, and as you can see, it just laid it out in a grid. Now it looks very similar. The only difference maybe is if I want to resize it, I can just drag this, make it look the exact same. Obviously they're not equal, it doesn't really matter because it is resizable. So if I do preview it, so if I go to form and I preview, you can see it's resizable, and that is our goal. All right, so now I just showed you how you can create this exact same starter interface. If you were following along, you should now have this in your QTDesigner. Save it as main.ui in your target folder. Now I'll talk about that in a second. And yeah, that's really it for creating the basic UI. So let me just close this, and let's actually just stick with the first UI that I've created, and we're going to use this one to load it in our code. So after creating it, I'm going to go to VS Code, where I'm going to write some Python code that's going to enable me to load this UI file into Python and execute the application. How do I do that? So here, as you can see in my folder, the folder is called PyQt5 checklist tutorial. I have something called a main.ui file. Now this file is a type of XML file. So you can see right here, it's an XML file. It's a pretty special XML file. So it's saved as .ui, and it contains all the different widgets and UI elements that we created in QTDesigner. It contains them in this special format. So you can see you have the Q main window, which is our main window. Inside of it, you have the central widget, which is the one we saw. You have the Q push button. You have the QListWidget that you can see right here as well. So you have everything that we just designed manually using drag and drop. You have it generated as XML in this file. So this main.ui file is the main source of the UI, which we want to load in Python. Now, how do we load it? I'm going to show you right now. Now, if you've seen any of my previous videos or any PyQt5 tutorials on my channel, you know that I go through this in almost every video. So I show you how you can load this into Python and how you can sort of get everything from QTDesigner and put it in a Python class, as well as some attributes for this class. If you haven't seen any of these, that's totally fine because I'm going to walk you through it, but I just wanted a refresher for recurring viewers who have already seen this type of thing explained. Okay, so how am I going to do this? First things first, I'm going to just add some imports. Now let me actually justify these imports and show you where and how we're actually going to use them. Firstly, from PyQt5.QtWidgets, I'm going to import the Q application. So the Q application is what's going to enable me to launch a PyQt5 app, and it will actually be the reason we can actually see anything, we can actually see the interface that we designed. Next is the Q main window. So remember when we first created our interface, it was of type Q main window. So this is the type of interface that we have. Finally is QListWidget item. I'm not going to talk too much about this one right now because we're going to see it as I go further in the video, but essentially it's related to the list widget, which will represent our checklist. Next, what we have, we're going to import a function called loadUI from PyQt5.UIC. So loadUI itself is actually a function which will enable me to perform all of this loading that I was talking about previously. I'll show you how when we write it in the code. Next, we're going to import sys. You'll also see why as we write the code. And finally, we're going to import qtcore from qtconsole.qt. And again, you're going to see why later on in the video. So now that we've actually imported everything, what we want to do next is we want to define a class. Now this class, in my case, I called it main. In your case, you can call this class pretty much anything, give it any name that you like, as long as it inherits from Q main window. Now, what does inherit mean? This is actually a principle in Python object-oriented programming, or in object-oriented programming in general, in which a class inherits all the attributes and the functions of another class. So Q main window is the superclass of our class main. The reason we have to specify this is because our main.ui itself is a Q main window. This is our root widget, and we actually need to refer to it. We need to be inherited from it in order to load everything related to it and actually execute the application. So here, this is a definitely necessary step to have this inheritance part right here. If you're not familiar with Python object-oriented principles, that's totally fine. While I do recommend that you actually learn them, you can just go ahead and follow along with this video and understand that you have to specify the widget type when you're defining the class. Next, we want to specify the constructor. So the init function is the function that gets executed when you first create an instance of this class. We do so using def init, and then we specify self. What we want to do next is we want to call the superclass. So we want to call the constructor of the superclass. Basically here I'm saying get me the superclass of main. In this case, this is QMain window. Then call the init function of this superclass. So just call the init function of QMain window. Finally, what I want to do next is I will load the UI in this main.ui file, and I will load it into this class. Now what happens here is all of the different widgets that you saw, so like the button, the QListWidget, we can actually load them as class attributes to this main class. So this load UI function, this is where all the magic happens. Now I have a video where I go more in depth about this process and how it works. I'm going to link it in the description, so if you're interested, you can check that one out. But for now, this is all you need to know in order to load this UI into your Python code. All right. Next, what we want to do is we actually want to execute the application. So this block of code that you see right here will enable us to create a Q application. So here in my main part, so if name equal main, so this is where everything is executed, I create an app. This app will be of type Q application, and you have to pass the system arguments to this Q application. Next, you create an instance of the main class. In my case, I named it window. And you want to window.show. So this will enable the window to actually show on the screen so that the user can actually see it. Finally, you want to execute the application. So you just have to run this. And now if we run this code, so we run this file, you can see we launched this very same application, the one we designed in QTDesigner. We were able to launch it through VS Code or any text editor that you like. This is how we were able to launch it. We were able to load it in the Python code. Again, it's responsive, resizable. You can see here we have this list widget. It's still empty, it's blank, there's nothing in it. And there is the button, which says toggle all, which we're going to talk about later on in the video. So these are the basics of this program. So we were able to actually load the interface. All right. So we're done with the starter code, we're done with the starter interface. Let's actually start talking how we're going to build this checklist. So let's go back to Designer and let me actually show you something. If you double click on this QListWidget, you can have an editor which enables you to edit the list widget. Now if I press on plus, I can create a new item which I'm going to call maybe walk dog, and then another item which will be clean house. Okay, so these are my to-dos. And if I press on OK, you can see that they're now in this main.ui. So now let me go back to Python and actually rerun this. You can see that I have these two items right here. Obviously, this is not the best way because we're doing it manually through the interface. What I want to do is I want to do it through the code, so I can show you how this works using the code, how we can link the code and the interface together and actually display them. So let's actually go back. And I'm going to double click on this again. I'm going to press this minus sign to delete them. I'm just going to save. Now that I've saved, let's go back. Let's double check that it's all gone. There we go. Here we go. So we have nothing here. Okay, it's all gone. So how are we actually going to load our to-dos from the Python code? What I'm going to do is I'm going to first create a list. So this Python list is going to look like this, and it's going to contain a bunch of to-dos, and the variable name will be called to-dos. So I have walk dog, buy groceries, send email, call bank, and clean house, some very generic and basic to-dos. Now that I have these here, what I want to do is I want to loop over this list and add every single one of these to the list widget. So let's go ahead, and as you can see, you have 4 to-do in to-dos. So I'm looping over this list. What I want to do next is I create something called an item. This is the variable name, it's called item, but this is where I'm going to need this QListWidget item that we imported before. So the QListWidget item, now you know this is the QListWidget. You can see the type here. If I grow the object inspector, this is a QListWidget. Now when I specify QListWidget item, this refers to the single item, so each row in this list widget. So now I created one for to do. So now to do is going to be either walk dog, buy groceries, all these things. For each one, I create a QListWidget item. Now, after creating this item, what I need to do next is I need to add this item to my list widget. So here I have self.todolistWidget.add item, and you have the item right here. Let me actually first show you that it works, and then I'll explain this line of code and why it works. So let's actually run it again. So as you can see, we have all the to-dos from our Python list. We have walk dog, buy groceries, and so on. Now, how are they actually added here? Again, we looped over each to-do in to-dos. We created a QListWidget item, and then I said self.todolistWidget add item. Now, add item is pretty self-explanatory. What we're going to do is add a QListWidget item to the QListWidget. Now, what does this here mean? If we go back to Designer, in my object inspector, to-do list widget is actually named by me. I named it to-do list widget. So here, in your case, this could probably be something like list widget. All right, so it's not necessarily something that is there by default. This is what I personally named it. So you have to-do list widget, and I can refer to it using self because of this load UI function. So load UI enabled me to load every single widget from my main.ui file into this class as class attributes. This is why I can refer to them using the self.etc. So as you can see right here. All right, so this is why this works. So now that we've loaded all our to-do items, let's actually take another look at it. As you can see, we are actually missing the checkbox part. We need that because the point of this tutorial is to show you how to create a checklist. Okay, so how do I do that? I'm going to need 2 lines of code. First things first is I need to set something called a flag. So the flags is this. So we're going to refer to this part, and this will enable us to have this sort of checkbox for each list item. So here what I'm saying is set flags to the original or the default flags for this item. Now every widget in PyQt5 has some default flags. So here I'm saying that don't modify anything with the original flags, keep everything as is. Then add a new flag, which is qtcore.qt. So this is where we needed this qtcore import. qtcore.qt.item is user checkable. So this part, this is what enables me to tell PyQt5, hey, go ahead, add a little checkbox to every single one of these list widget items. Finally, after you add this, let me actually comment this line out. Let's actually run it, and I should show you why we need the second line. Nothing was added, nothing changes. We still have these different elements with no checkbox right here. Why is that? This is because while I did add the flag saying that, okay, this should be user checkable, the user should be able to check it, I need to set the check state. Now the check state can be one of 2 things. It's either checked or unchecked. Now checked, it means the state is checked, so the thing itself is checked. Unchecked means that there's no check in the checkbox. So let's actually show you how this works. So now let's run it. And as you can see, we now have a checkbox and we have a working checklist. So I can check and uncheck different items. And as you can see, I can select, check, uncheck. Now, because I said unchecked here, they started off as unchecked. Now, if I say checked and I go ahead, you can see it starts off with everything checked. So this is sort of the point why we need to set the state. So again, every time you need to add a sort of checklist to your list widget, you have to first set the flags, make sure that it's user checkable as we did right here. And second, you have to set a check state, either checked or unchecked, to make sure that there is sort of an initial state for these different checkboxes. So now we were actually able to load all of these to-dos, create a checkbox for each of them, and actually put them on our screen in this checklist. So we have officially created a checklist in PyQt5. Now I want to go one step further. You see this button right here. So this button, it's called toggle all button. What do I mean by toggle all? Well, I have a specific goal in mind. Let's run it again. Let me show you. So my goal is that for each of these items, so let's say for example, I had this, I want to press on toggle all and I want these to be switched. So in this case, walk dog and call bank are checked. I want them to become unchecked and I want the rest to become checked. So I'm sort of flipping everything around. I'm only doing this for the sake of example. I can't actually think of a real use case where this would be relevant, but this will enable you to actually work with these different checkboxes and show you how you can manipulate each of them individually to check and uncheck them through the Python code. So let's actually demo this and let me show you how it works. So first things first, I have this button. It's called toggle all. So this toggle all button, simply I have to call it using so you have to call it using the self.toggleAll button. So here. So now that I've done this, what I do next is say .clicked.connect. So I'm saying when this toggle all button is clicked, connect me to self.toggleAll. Okay, so here I'm saying that you have to connect me to this self.toggleAll. What do I mean by this? That I'm saying connect this button with this function that you see right here. So I'm connecting this button to a function. When the button is clicked, go ahead, execute the function. All right, perfect. Now that I've connected the two, what I want to do is actually perform the toggling. How do I do that? Firstly, I want to retrieve all the list widget items currently present on the screen. So there's a bunch of items on the screen. What I want to do is I want to go ahead and retrieve them. So here I'm getting all 5 or 6 of them. So I do so using the following. I create a loop and I loop over the to-do list widget.count. So for example, if I have 5 or 6, this will return the number 5 or 6. So in our case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I actually have 5. So this count will actually be 5. And so I will range from 0 till 4 because this is how range works in Python. So now we're actually looping over the different elements in the to-do list widget. Now, how do I retrieve each single list widget item individually? Here's what I do next. I say item is equal to self.to-do-list-widget.item. So as you can see right here, I was actually able to retrieve this item. Now, item itself is a QListWidget item. Next, I'm going to check if the item check state, so item.check state, so here I'm retrieving, is it checked or unchecked, is equal to qtcore.qt.checked. So if it's equal to checked, so if this item is actually checked, go ahead and set the check state to unchecked. So this is my target. If it's checked, set it to unchecked. And then we're going to do the opposite. But first, let me actually show you that this works. So if it's checked, go ahead and make it unchecked. Let's run it. And let's say I'm going to check by groceries. So by default, now if we press on toggle all, what it should do is it should uncheck this one without doing anything to the others. So let's press on toggle all. As you can see, it was unchecked. This is because I said, if it's checked, go ahead, uncheck it. Now I'm going to do the exact opposite. So else, just set it to checked. Now let's run it. And we should have a complete toggle function. So let's actually check buy groceries and clean house. Now let's toggle it. And now you can see that it was the opposite. So these guys were unchecked. These guys became checked. Okay, so this looks good. This is exactly what we wanted. And this, now we have a functioning checklist in PyQt5, and we also have the button which toggles these guys. Now, one thing I actually want to fix, and it's a mistake that I noticed I did, is here this self.toggleAll button should not be within the for loop. This is not related. It's part of the init function, so it's definitely part of the constructor, but it's not part of the for loop. So please pay attention to that. I apologize. It's a mistake on my end, but yeah, that's really it. All right, so now we have a functioning checklist and we have the toggle button. Using the toggle button, I was able to show you how you can manipulate the checklist using Python code. Now, the final thing I want to do is I want to add some slight formatting to this checklist just to make it look more presentable and more attractive. So let's go ahead. And as you can see, I have the main.ui here. Now, if I right click on my central widget, so I'm just going to say change style sheet. So the style sheet in PyQt5 is where you can write some very CSS-like code. So these are some Qt-specific style sheets where you can actually style and reformat your interface. So I'm just going to paste a style sheet right here, mainly because this isn't really the purpose of the video, but I'm going to walk you through it. And of course, it's going to be available in the source code when I add it to the description. So as soon as I upload the video, you can directly copy paste this and add it to your style sheet. So what I did is I set a background color for my Q widget. This will set the background color for the background widget, so for the background of my application. Next, what I did is I'm going to add a different background color for the list widget itself, change the margin and the font, and then do the same for the button. So for the button, I also changed a background color, changed the margin left and margin right, and also changed the font. Now let me actually copy this and cancel, because I want to just show you the difference, why we're actually changing the margin. Let me run it. So as you can see that this border that we have right here is existent in QTDesigner, but we don't actually see it in Python when we run the application. So we're missing this border, and the border itself is actually pretty nice because it separates the checklist from the rest of the application. So how are we going to fix this? We're going to add the margin using the style sheet that I showed you. So if I go back here, change the style sheet and paste this exact style sheet all over again, I press apply. Again, you can copy paste this from the source code. I'm just going to press OK and save. So here, as you can see, it looks kind of different. Let's go back to the code and run it. So as you can see right here, we have the font has changed. It's much bigger. We have a new background color and a new sort of foreground color, you could say, for both the list widget and the button. And you can see it looks different. And the margin itself is this part right here. So it separates the list widget from the rest of the application. Again, it's still responsive and resizable, so you can resize the screen as you see fit. Alright, so that's really it for this video. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that you now are able to create a checklist with PyQt5, write some manipulating functions, as well as reformat this checklist to make it look more presentable, or as presentable as we did in this video. In today's video, we're going to take an Excel file and load all of the data from it into a PyQt5 application, and more specifically, a QTableWidget. So the QTableWidget is basically this type of table that you see right here on my screen. So this is within a PyQt5 application, and we're going to take all of this data from an Excel file, so this one that I'm showing you right now, and we're going to load this data in the PyQt5 table. So this is the goal of the tutorial. The tutorial is definitely beginner friendly, so you may follow along if you are a beginner. The only thing I ask of you is that you have PyQt5 installed. I do have a separate video, very short, that you can refer to if you want to see the instructions on how to install PyQt5. And without further ado, let's get started. So I'm going to pull up VS Code. I'm actually going to close the application. So I have VS Code open with a blank Python file. So inside my folder called PyQt5 Excel to QTableWidget, I have two main files, the main.py, which is the Python file where we're going to write our code, as well as the Excel file containing all our data. Now, do note that I'm using VS Code because it's my preference. However, you can use any text editor that you like or that you're comfortable with, so long as that you can run Python and you're able to actually be comfortable working with it. Alright, so this is my blank file. Let me actually first show you the Excel file. So just a disclaimer, this isn't my file. I didn't write this or create this. I downloaded it. So the source link for the main file will be in the description. Now, I think I did remove one of the columns when I downloaded the file, so it may not be exactly the same thing. However, this file will be inside the GitHub repository linked in the description, which will contain the source code as well as the main Excel file. Alright. So we're using this file. We obviously want to load this Excel data into our program. How do we do that? We're going to use a popular Python module called openpyxl. So to install it, you need to pull up a CMD or a terminal. So here I'm using the integrated terminal in VS Code, and simply you're going to type pip install openpyxl. Now this is going to take about a minute for you to install. In my case, I already have it, so it says requirement already satisfied. So in your case, just wait a minute, it should be there. Alright, now that we've installed openpyxl, we can go ahead and start using it to load this data into PyQt5. So first things first, when we write our code, we want to actually import everything that we need. What we want to import is the following. So from PyQt5.QtWidgets, so if you have PyQt5 installed, you should be able to import this QtWidgets. You want to import QApplication, QWidget, QVBoxLayout, QTableWidget, and QTableWidget item. To make things easier, you can go ahead and replace all of this with an asterisk. This way you would import the entire QTWidgets module, but for the sake of specificity, I chose to type each of them out. And you'll see where we're going to use each single one as I show you throughout the code. Okay, next thing you want to do is you want to import sys. Again, I'll show you why we need it in just a second. Finally, you want to import openpyxl. So openpyxl is super important. This is how we're going to actually access all of the data in the Excel file and how we're going to load it. Alright, so let's get started by actually creating the most basic PyQt5 application. So let's write down the starter code for a basic PyQt5 app. Then we'll see how we can add a QTableWidget and load the Excel content. Okay. So you want to define a class. The class in this case will inherit from QWidget. So this is where we're using this QWidget import. So this will create the window that we're going to launch when we launch the application. Then you want to fill in the constructor for this class, so the init function. You want to call the init function of the superclass. So using this line of code, we're actually calling the init function of the superclass. In this case, this is the QWidget. Alright. Next, what we want to do is we want to set the window title of our application. So here, this will be the title of the window. I'll show you when we run it. The title will be Load Excel Data to QTableWidget. So this is the title of our application. Now that we've done this, what we want to do next is actually execute the application. To do so, we need this block of code right here. Inside if name equal main, so this is where we're actually executing the Python code. What we want to do is define a QApplication inside a variable called app. Every Python app needs a QApplication to actually be able to be executed. So this is how we can actually execute the application and see what we developed. We pass sys.argv. This is actually saying that we're passing the command line arguments to this QApplication. In our case, we don't really have any, but we keep it here regardless. Next, what we do is we create a window variable which has an instance of the main class. So this main class, we create an instance of it, and what we want to do next is to say window.showMaximized. ShowMaximized will ensure the application launches and it's almost full screen, so it's totally maximized to the size of your screen. Finally, we execute the application using app.exec. So let's run it and see what we have so far. And as you can see, it launches a big application. It's definitely maximized and it's totally empty. So it's totally blank. The title, as you can see, we set the window title to be Load Excel Data to QTableWidget, and you can see it right here. So now we've created the most basic PyQt5 application. What we want to do next is to actually add a QTableWidget to our app. We can't do that before first adding a layout for our application. So for simplicity, I'm going to use a QVBox layout. This will essentially lay everything out in one vertical column. So everything will be under each other, stacked under each other. In our case, we only have one thing. This is the QTableWidget. So it doesn't really matter whether it's a vertical box or a horizontal box. So I say layout is QVBox layout. Then I set the self.setLayout to be layout itself. So the layout that I previously defined. After doing so, here I can create my QTableWidget. To do so is very simple. Using one line of code, I say self.tablewidget.QTableWidget. So here I'm creating an instance of this QTableWidget class and I'm saving it inside a variable called self.tablewidget. Finally, what I want to do is I say layout.addWidget. And here is where I'm going to say self.tablewidget. So I'm adding my widget into this layout. Now if I run it, I should be able to see, you see this is the table widget. Obviously it's blank, there are no rows or columns, there is no data, there is nothing. It's just a blank table widget that we just added to our application. Okay, perfect. So we have the QTableWidget. What we want to do next is to actually load this Excel data. To do so, I'm going to create a function called load data, and it's going to look like this. So and then I'm going to go define it. Let's say load data. And of course we have to pass self. So this is where I'm going to load all of the Excel data into this QTableWidget. All right, how am I actually going to do this? I need to utilize openpyxl. First things first, I need the path of my Excel file. So I'm going to come here to my Excel file, I'm going to right click and I'm going to copy the path. I'm going to create a string and copy paste the absolute path into my Python code. So now we have the path inside a variable. Next thing I want to do is to say workbook. So this is a variable and I'm going to say openpyxl.load workbook, and then I have to pass the path. So here I'm saying go to this path and load me this workbook using openpyxl. I'm saving this in a variable. Now the way openpyxl works is that load workbook will actually open up this workbook that we have right here. However, you do know that in Excel you might have multiple sheets. So in our case we have one sheet. However, usually in Excel there may be multiple sheets. So we need to refer to this sheet using sheet. It will be workbook.active. So active means the currently open sheet. So now list of countries is active because it's currently open inside the Excel file. All right, now that I have the sheet, I'm able to actually load all of the different values. And to do so, I'm actually going to show you how I can load them. It's pretty simple. So let's say values is equal to list. So you'll see why I'm converting a list in just a second. Sheet.values. Okay, so sheet itself refers to my active sheet in my Excel file, and then dot values will get me all of the different values inside of this sheet. I convert it to a list, and now this will produce a list of tuples containing my values. What I'm going to do next is, just for the sake of showing you, I'll say for value in values, print value. And I'll show you what each value is. So let's run it and see what it prints out. You can see it still launches the blank application. We still haven't put everything inside the QTableWidget. But going back to the code, you can see these are the values. So you have the first tuple. So this is a Python tuple. These parentheses, they show you a Python tuple. You have rank, country, population, and then the percent of the world population. And then in each one, you have the rank and the value of the country and the value of the population as well. So as you can see, this actually enabled us to retrieve all the values from the Excel sheet and load them in Python. So this is where openpyxl did its job. We opened up the workbook, we accessed the sheet, and then we accessed the value of this sheet. What we did was simply just print these values. However, the main goal of this tutorial is to take these values and to put them in the QTableWidget. So let's do that. I'm going to close this and I'm going to actually shut this off, and I'm going to rename this to be list_values, just to signify that this is a list of all the values, and the values themselves are Python tuples as we just saw. Okay, you notice that the very first one, let me actually pull up the output again. Let me actually run it again. So here, as you can see, this first value in the values list, so the first tuple, is just the header of the Excel file. So you have rank, country, population, percent of world pop. These are the header. This is the main part of the Excel file. We want this to be set as the header in the QTableWidget. So the way I'm going to do that is very simple. I'll say self.tablewidget.set horizontal header labels. So this will set the labels for the header, and then I'm going to pass list values sub 0. So here, take the very first list, the very first tuple inside this list, give it to the header. So let's rerun it and see how it looks like. We still actually don't find anything in the table. Why is that? This is because we haven't set a row or a column count for the table. In PyQt5, you always have to set the row count and the column count before you start populating your QTableWidget. So let's do that. So we close this and come back to the code. So let's go here and say self.tablewidget.set row count. And what I'm going to do is say sheet.max row. So sheet.max row will get me the maximum number of rows with actual values in my Excel sheet. and then self.TableWidget again dot set column count, and here we'll say sheet.max column. So this is the maximum number of columns. In this case, we have 4 columns. So this max column value will actually be 4. So after doing this, let's rerun. And as you can see, we now can see the header of this table, and you can actually see the actual physical table right here. So you can see all of the rows, the 4 columns, and you have rank, country, population, and the percentage as the header. So they're not actually one of the rows. This is the header of the table. So now we've added the main information, the header, as well as we've added the number of rows and number of columns. The very last thing we need to do is to actually add the data. All right, let's add the data. So to do so, I'm going to create a for loop, and this will loop over my data inside this list.values variable. So let's say for value tuple. So here I'm indicating that this is a tuple. However, you can name it anything you want in list values. Okay, so now let's just maybe print this out for now, because I want to show you one main thing. Let's run it and go back here to see what we printed out. You can see the very first one is this rank, country, population, percent of world population. So how do we get rid of this? Simply, we will just slice the list. So I will say list values, and we'll go here, so 1 and so on. So we're saying take the list values list and start from position 1 and go until the end. So here we're skipping out on the very first value in this list. The reason is we don't want to put the header again a second time inside the table. All right, so this value tuple will return this row. It will return a single row, the values of a row. Let me show you again. So let's run it and go to the print. You can see it starts like this. So 0, world, the values. So these are the values for each separate row. And notice that we no longer have the header being printed out here. So this was our goal, to get rid of the header. So you can see the values are printed here. Now this value represents one value tuple. So each time I print a value tuple, I get this row right here. Before I show you how you can actually insert this value tuple into the QTableWidget, let me show you first how to actually insert any value in the QTableWidget. So I'm going to comment these out and go to a new line. All you need to do is run this line of code. You say self.tablewidget.set item. Then you specify the number of the row as well as the number of the column. So if I say row 0, column 1, or let's say column 2, and then we say QTableWidget item, you create a new QTableWidget item. This represents a single item inside the QTableWidget, so one cell. Let's say hello. So I'm just doing this for example, just so that you can understand how we set a value to the QTableWidget. Let's rerun it. Now you can see in row 0, which is the first row, because everything in Python starts at index 0, and then column 2, which is the third column, we just added hello here. And now I can change these values any way that I want. So coming back here, I can say in row 1, in column 1, let's say row 7. Let's rerun it. You can see it right here. So it changed the position. So now what we want to do is to actually create this loop and fill in all of the information in the respective cells. Okay, so let me just comment this one out now and go back to where we were writing our code. So we have value tuple. We want to loop over this value tuple and insert every single value into the QTableWidget. So I'll say for value in value tuple. And now what I'll say is self.tablewidget.set item, the way we said before. Now we're going to need something for the row and the column. Let's get back to it in just a second. But the QTableWidget item itself will be the value that we said right here. So this will be one of the values inside the tuple. We convert it to a string just to stay safe in case there are integers that are too big to be represented as integers in Python. So we keep everything as a string. So what is going to be the index of the row and the index of the column? So these need to be set dynamically. We can't do this, we can't hard code it and say 0, 1, or 7 the way we were doing so before. So let me clear this. We need to set it dynamically. So for the column, what I'm going to do is come here and I'll say column index equal 0. So the column index will be which column we're putting our this table item. So the column index, it starts at 0 and it's going to be incremented every single time this loop occurs. So as we loop over the values, we're going to insert this item in a different column. Okay, so we have the column index. Now what we need is a row index. So let me clear this print statement and come here outside of this loop. We're going to have a row index. It's going to be equal to 0. And then every time we loop this outer loop, we're going to increment the row index by 1. So let me show you now whether this works, and I'll go back and explain it. So let's see. So now I ran it, and as you can see, all of the information that was present in the Excel sheet now appears inside my table. So the way this works is that this row index will loop from 0 till the maximum amount of rows, and then each row we loop over every single individual item inside this row, so every single individual column. And this is how we were able to get all of this information using openpyxl and add it to our QTableWidget, as you can see right here. So now we have all of our data in our PyQt5 application inside our Q widget. Alright, so that's really it for this video. Again, the source code will be available in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to create this very nice and simple beginner-friendly PyQt5 project. So in this project, what you're going to do is create this interface, design it, style it, create everything related to the interface using PyQt5, and then you're going to write some Python code, use some external Python libraries, which will allow you to send emails using your real Gmail account. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send an email from one Gmail account to another. These two accounts are like burner accounts that I created just for the purpose of this video. I do recommend you create a separate account for sending some emails. I don't want you to use your own personal account. I'll get more into this throughout the video, but for now, just know that you will need to create a new Gmail account within this video. Now this video is totally beginner friendly. You can definitely follow along if it's your first time using PyQt5. I will walk you through the steps to design this UI step by step and explain every single thing as we go. The only thing I ask of you is to have PyQt5 installed. If you don't, I have a very short video, 4 minutes, in which I show you how to install both PyQt5 and QtDesigner and how to set them up. QtDesigner is also essential for this tutorial because we're going to use it to design our interface. Alright, so without further ado, let's just get started. Source code is in the description as always, and yeah, let's just get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to code everything related to PyQt5. So we're going to design the UI, create it, style it, fix it up, then load it into our Python code, and then in the second part of the video, we're actually going to write the functionality to send the emails. So first things first, here I have this empty project in Visual Studio Code. However, in your case, you can use any text editor that you like or are comfortable with, so long as you can run Python, so long as you have PyQt5 installed, of course, the usual stuff. So I'm using VS Code. Here in this empty project, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, and it's going to be called main.py, and this will be where we will write our Python code. Other than that, that's really all I want to do in VS Code for now. I'm going to jump into PyQt5's QTDesigner, which is this guy right here, and this is where we're going to design our UI. So first things first, you have a new form. We're going to select a main window, so our form will be a Q main window since our application will only have one window anyways. And then I'm just going to press on create. This will pull up this default main window right here. So the main window, it has a menu bar, it has a status bar. We're actually not going to use these guys in this tutorial. So for now, what we're going to do is just design stuff inside this central widget right here, which is the main part. This is where we will put all our different widgets. So we need a few widgets right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll here in this widget box and come here to input widgets. We're interested in a line edit. This is where we're going to write who the recipient is of our email. So this is a line edit. Then we also will need a text edit for sending our email. So this is where we'll write the contents of our emails. We will need a label also. So this will be the label, and this one will say recipient. And then we will also need another label. We'll put this one right here. And this label will actually say body. So let's just go with email body. Okay, so this is the content of our interface for now. So this is what it looks like. Obviously, it looks super messy and it doesn't really look like a very useful interface for an application. Now you can come here and preview it. So we go to Form and Preview. This will show us how this interface will look like after we load it into our Python code. So this is how it will look like through Python without all the grids and the dots and all the things that help us design. This is how it will look upon execution. Now, if we resize it, as you can see, it's not really responsive. Everything really stays in one place. So it's not really the best UI out there. And of course, it doesn't really look that great either. So what we're going to do is a very simple trick. We're going to come here to our central widget. We're going to right click on it and go to layout. So here, this will enable us to lay out our widgets in a special way. What I'm going to go with is the easiest manner possible, which is layout in a grid. Now what this does is it stretches out everything, it positions them, and it lays them out in a proper grid. Now, if I preview it, as you can see, now it looks more like a real email editor and it looks more like a presentable application, and it also is resizable. So if I resize my window, you can see the widgets get resized with it. So this is actually a very neat trick so that you allow PyQt5 to do sort of all the heavy lifting for you, and you don't really have to worry about layout management anymore. Now, one last thing we want to add actually is the button allowing us to actually send emails. So we're going to need a button. We won't find the button here in input widgets. I think we need to scroll up and you can come here, you find buttons, you have push button. And you can see we can just drag it here and it fits right into our interface. So this is the most basic format of our interface. Let me just rename the button, not really rename, just change the label on top of the button and say send email. So this will prompt the user to actually send the email. And all right, this is the interface we have designed. We have our central widget. Inside it, we have two different labels. We have a button, and here we have a line edit, which is an input line edit. This is where the user will input some text. And we have a text edit, which is a multi-line input. So this is where the user can write multiple lines. It makes sense to include this for the email because the email itself will be multiple lines. However, the recipient's email address is definitely just going to be one short line. Okay, all right, so now we have actually designed the UI. What we want to do next is we want to save this UI. So we will save it inside the folder in which we are going to code. So here I'm just going to call this one main.ui, not io.ui, and save. Now that we've saved it, if we go back to VS Code, you can see this UI file was created right here. Now, if I open up this UI file, you can see there is a type of XML syntax inside of it. This XML syntax is the way PyQt5 saves all this information from the designer offline. So this is how they save it inside this XML file. It's a special format and it's a special type of file. You can see all our widgets, so you can see the central widget here, you have the grid layout, you have the QText edit, you have the QLabel. Everything exists in this XML file the way we already designed it in our designer. So the next thing we want to do is you want to use Python to load this XML stuff into Python so we have an application that can be ran and executed using Python. So this is actually pretty straightforward. Now I've done this so many times in multiple videos before, so I'm just going to go through it. However, I anticipate some beginners will be watching this tutorial, so I will also explain step by step what's going on. First things first, we need to perform our imports. So I'm just going to import from PyQt5.QtWidgets. I'm going to import Q main window as well as Q application, and these are the only guys that we need for now. Next, from PyQt5.UIC, I'm going to import load UI. This will enable me to load the UI files from this main.ui into my Python code, and you'll see how as I show you. And finally, I'm just going to import sys. I'm going to need this for execution, and you'll see why later on in the code. Now that I've finished my imports, I need to define a Python class. So this is really related to Python object-oriented programming. I'm going to name my class main, so you can call it whatever you want in this case, or we can actually call it something like email sender. And now this class will be inherited from the QMain window. So the QMain window is the superclass of email sender. This means that email sender will inherit all of the different methods and properties of QMain window. So the type of email sender is essentially a QMain window. Think of it like that. However, I do recommend you look more into object-oriented programming if you really want to program so many UIs using Python. So now that you've defined the class, you want to define the init function of this class. This is the constructor. Okay, sorry, we don't really need all of this. So this is the init function. This gets executed as soon as you initialize or instantiate an instance of this class. So as soon as you create an instance of this class, this function will be executed. It's init, so you're initializing your object. So in our case, what does the init do? First things first, it has to call the init function of the superclass. So we will say email sender self. So the super of email sender, in this case, it's QMain window dot init. So we want to call the init function of the parent class. Next, we want to use this load UI function that we imported to actually load the UI file. So I'm just going to say main.ui. Here you type the actual name of this UI file right here. And finally, you just have to also pass self here as well, because this is also part of this class. Now that we finished defining the class, we actually want to execute the application. So I will say if name is equal to main. So here I'm executing my main function. What I'm going to do next is define an app. So this will be an instance of Q application. Every PyQt5 application needs one Q application instance in order to be executed. And then this will also take as input the sys.argv. Finally, what I need to do is also I need to define an instance of my email sender. So I'm just going to say window is equal to email sender. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to simply show my window. So make sure that it's available for the user to see. Finally, I will just use app.exec to execute my application. Now that I've written all of this code, if I actually run this Python code right here, this will actually launch the interface that we designed within Designer. And as you can see, we have all the elements and the widgets that we already designed. It's also resizable, and it looks the exact same as we designed it. So this is how we were able to use our Python code to load this information and this design from this main.ui file. This is super important and super useful because now you're able to sort of separate your UI design process from your writing your code and the logic of your code in Python. So this is really nice and really interesting, and one of the main benefits of using PyQt5 as well as QTDesigner. All right. So now that we have designed the UI and we have actually loaded it inside Python, the next thing I want to do is I actually want to kind of style this UI and make it look a bit more presentable. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to come back to QTDesigner, and here inside QTDesigner, there's one thing you can do called the change style sheet. Now the change style sheet, this allows you to write some CSS-like style sheets that allow you to style your interface. For example, I can come here and I can say color red, and I'm doing this on the text edit because I right-clicked on it. If I press apply and I press OK, I preview my application again, and if I type stuff here, you can see the font color itself became red. So this is also super interesting. So we want to style it, but we don't want the color to be red, so I'm just going to Control Z and undo. Now, one way to style multiple things at once in PyQt5 is rather than styling each widget individually, you will style the parent widget. If you come here to the object inspector, you can see that all these widgets here exist and their parent is the central widget. Or even so, the parent of the central widget itself is the QMain window. So we're going to come to the QMain window and we're going to right click on it and we're going to change style sheet. So we're going to type our style sheet right here. The first style sheet we're going to type is something called QWidget. So here I'm selecting all the QWidgets on the screen, and by default, everything here on the screen is a QWidget. So even the text edits, the labels, the buttons, the line edit, these guys are all types of QWidgets. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply say background color, and I'm going to define the color to be RGB, and this is going to be 333333. So this is one color to get this sort of grayish black that we're going to use in our application, a type of dark mode. So now if I press apply, as you can see, the background changed for all of the widgets that I had on my screen. Why did the background change? This is simply because we said QWidget changed the background color for it. So you will do this for every QWidget on the screen. So this is what a selector essentially is in CSS. Next, I'm going to change color. Now, background color refers to the background color. Color here usually refers to the foreground or actually the font color. So the font color, we're just going to make it so that it's actually white. So we use 6 Fs right here to indicate that this is the color white. Okay, next what we're going to do, so we have style, let's actually apply this. You can see the font color kind of changes. Now that we have styled the widgets in general, what we're going to do is we will now style individually the text edit and the line edit. So we'll say Q text edit, and then open up this curly brace again. And here inside the text edit, I actually want to change the background color. I don't want it to be the same type of gray. I want a sort of lighter color. So I will say background color. And here what this will be is RGB, and it's going to be 46, 46, 46. Okay, and let's actually press apply. Now you don't really see any difference. Let's just actually press OK and save. And now let's preview, and now you can see that the background color for the text edit itself looks much different from everything else. It's a lighter shade of gray. And also do note one thing, that all of the font that we can type is in white. This is because we changed the font color of the parent widget. Alright, perfect. So now that we have changed the text edit, let's go back to our style sheet right here. We want to do the very same for the line edit. So for the same background color, what I'm just going to do is come here and I'm going to just type Q line edit, press apply, press OK, and then preview, and you can see they are both now this shade of gray. Alright, the final thing we're going to do is change the background color of the push button, and that's going to be all of the simple styling that we're doing today. Just again, open up the style sheet. You can come here and you can go to Q push button, and then just style this using background color. And now we're going to say RGB, and we're going to go with 120, 120, and 120. Now press apply, press OK, save the UI, preview it, and you can see the button looks as if it's a lighter shade of gray than all of the others. So this is really not the most beautiful interface out there. It's not something that a front-end developer at Google developed, so definitely not. But it's just something that makes it look more presentable, especially as a beginner project. It looks better than using the default widgets that PyQt5 provides. If you just use those without any styling, it might look pretty bare, especially that we have a ton of text space and that can be too much white on the screen. So this is just the basic styling that we're going to employ in this application. So now that we have saved everything, we can go back to VS Code and confirm that everything also is loaded in the Python code. So let's actually run it. And as you can see, the modified UI is now available within Python. This is because this load UI function works dynamically and you don't need to do any changes yourself to your Python code. This UI will just automatically get updated each time. It's still resizable, by the way, and you can still use it like that. The last thing related to PyQt5 we're going to do today is we're going to handle the events related to the button. So because I have a button right here, what you want to do is you want to send an email every time this button is clicked. So how do we handle this on-click event? So we call this an event because essentially something is occurring, an event is happening. We're going to come here inside our init function and we're going to do the following. Let's say self.pushButton, and then we're going to say .clicked.connect. And I'm going to verify what each of these guys means right now. So self.pushButton, where did I get this pushButton variable for my class, even though I haven't really defined it anywhere? If you come back here into the designer and then you press on this button and you open up something called the property editor, so let's go view property editor. Now you might actually have this already open in your QTDesigner. For some reason I had it closed, but you might actually have this open. Anyways, you can change your windows using this view thing right here. But anyways, as you can see, the object name here, it's called pushButton. I can change this name to be email button if I want, and then just save my UI. So here, rather than self.pushButton, I just have to say self.emailButton. .clicked, it's exactly how it sounds. So here I'm handling when this email button is clicked, connect me to a certain function. This function will be called self.sendEmail. So where does this send email function come from? We're actually going to define it ourselves. And then this is going to be self.sendEmail. Obviously it takes self. For now, because we're not writing any of the code to send the email, I'm just going to print out email sent. Okay, so there's really no real sending for now, but for now this is what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and now let's say press the send email, and as you can see it says email sent. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now that we have created the UI and connected the button to a function, the next thing we want to do is actually write the functionality and enable ourselves to send some emails. So this is really the purpose of this tutorial, and this is what I'm about to show you next. So for now, let me just close this and close this guy as well. So first things first, I'm going to add a few lines of code to this mail.py, but other than that, what I also created is an email_sender.py file. So if I go to email_sender.py, as you can see right here, there is nothing inside this file other than one single function, and the function doesn't do anything. So it has a pass. Pass means that for now, so far, this function has not been implemented. There's no functionality within this function. All it does is simply get executed. It will just pass and nothing happens. Okay, so this function, what it does is supposedly it takes the recipient as an argument, and it also takes the email. And then what it does is it will supposedly send the email. So this is what we plan to do. And then in my main.py, what I want to do is simply the following. I want to import this using this line of code. So from email sender, which is the file that I created there, I'm going to import send_email. Now, why have I created a separate file for this, and why have I created a separate function as well? Why not just write all the email functionality right here in this same spot? The reason is simply we want to keep our code cleaner and sort of separate the PyQt5 stuff from the email sending stuff, since we're going to write a bunch of lines of code for the email sending part. Okay, so this is it for importing the email sender. Now after that, what I want to do is I want to actually call this function right here. And the way I'm going to do it is as follows. So send_email, and as we said before, we have two arguments. So you have the recipient, it's equal to something, and then you have the email equals to something. Was it email? Yes, it was email. Okay, so we have these two arguments right here. So here there should be two strings. Here I should write something at gmail.com maybe, and then here is the actual text of the email, right? So this is the main logic that we want to do. But now, rather than write it through the code, we want to actually get these from our interface from PyQt5. So I'm just going to undo these and clear them. So how do we get these from PyQt5? Well, let's take a look. The recipient itself exists inside this line edit right here. And this line edit has the following object name, which is line edit. So I can do the following. I can simply say self.lineEdit.text. So this function right here, this will create, or this will actually not create, or this will get me the text from my line edit. And then here in the email part, what I'm going to do is I will say self.textEdit, and rather than .text, we will say .toPlain text. Since we are sending plain text emails, this is how we will retrieve the text from both the line edit as well as the text edit. Okay, so this will get me the text, whatever the user has typed in this line edit, and the email one will get me all the text in the text edit. So now that we have actually retrieved them, we pass them to this send email function, which exists in this email sender. Let's actually write now print recipient is, and then recipient, and then also print out email is, and then email. Okay, just to show you how this function is working. So let's actually run this app again. Let's type some email. So me@gmail.com. No worries, because we're not actually sending anything. And here I'm going to type, hi, how are you? Okay, we're going to press on send email, and then this printed out recipient is me@gmail.com, and then the email is hi, how are you? Okay, so perfect. This thing here worked. We were able to pass this information from this code to the function send email in the email sender.py. So I'm just going to clear these since we don't need them anymore and get back to our pass function. Okay, so how are we going to actually code the email sending? Before I explain to you how we're going to do this, I'm just going to show you again the accounts that I have opened. So here I'm using two different burner accounts. So this one is called Code First Burner, and then there is this one called Tutorial Code First. So I was trying to be creative, but I'm going to delete these accounts as soon as I'm done with this tutorial, so no worries there. But this is for educational purposes only. I do highly recommend you create separate accounts for this tutorial. I do not want you to use your own personal account and then end up with a bunch of security problems and end up losing your account. This is not the point of this video. The point of this video is to utilize some PyQt5 knowledge to create an interface, and then some Python knowledge as well to send emails. The point isn't for you to create this entire system and use your own personal email in the process. So please, I ask of you, do not use your personal email. Do as I did. I created two separate emails. If you don't want to create two separate ones, you can just create one for the sender. So really, it's the sender that we're going to exploit its security. The recipient, it's not really that important. So you can use any regular email for the recipient, but for the sender, I highly stress you create a separate account. Okay, so these are the accounts that I'm going to use. We're going to come back to these accounts, and we're actually going to change something in the sender account, which is this one, the burner one. And I'll show you how as we get there. But for now, these are my two accounts. This is what I'm using, and this is how I'm going to write my emails through PyQt5. All right, let's go back to the code, and let's actually clear and close the interface. So to do the sending, I'm going to need two Python libraries, and these Python libraries are the following. They are SMTP library as well as SSL. Okay, so I imported both of them. No installation is required. They are part of the standard Python library, so you definitely have them. You just need to import them. No need for any pip install or anything like that. So here is what we have. We have imported the two. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to actually use them. Before we get there, let's actually talk about them for a bit. So these are two built-in libraries. What is SMTP library? SMTP itself, it actually stands for the following. It stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. So this is what these mail services use to transfer this mail. And this is what Gmail is going to use to transfer our emails through this application. So this is the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And we're going to use it from within Python to send these emails. So this is essentially what it is. Now SSL, it stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and this is what will allow us to encrypt these emails and make sure we're doing everything securely in order not to just send things without any encryption. You actually need to have some sort of security context and actually use this in your application. You'll see more about these guys as we use them within the code, and you'll see how we're going to use these libraries and how this all makes sense sort of together. Okay, but this is the very first step. Make sure you import these two different libraries. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define a few things as I do right here. And okay, don't get confused. This might start looking a bit confusing. There are only 3 lines of code, and we're going to walk through them together. So port 465, this is the port required for SSL. So you actually need this port in order to use the SSL encryption. Next, you will define the SMTP server. So the SMTP server is how Gmail will use this protocol, the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, to send your email. So this SMTP server has to be equal to smtp.gmail.com. So this is non-negotiable as well as this. So you guys have to actually write these exactly the same way I have them here. Finally, the sender, this is where it's going to differ for you. The sender itself, is the email you want to send the emails from. So for me, this is the Code1 account that I created. Not very creative name, I know that, but this is the email that we're going to use. In your case, as I mentioned before, please do create a new email account for this and write the address of that email account here. This will be your sender, which will enable you to send the email. Alright, now that you have added the sender, you can't just send from any email, you actually have to log in. So we will need to specify the password. Now this is where it gets tricky. Here, you don't actually need to write the password itself that you created for this account. As of May 2022, so very recently, this doesn't even work anymore, so you can't write your original password. We need to use a small hack in order to get around this and actually still use SMTP with Gmail. So this is what we're going to do. Let's go back to our burner account, which is the one I have right here. So this is Code1. This is my Google account. What you're going to want to do is you want to go to manage your Google account and then select security. So here I have my security, and as you can see, I'm inside the security, and you can see that I have enabled two-step verification. Now, if this is a new account, this two-step verification will be off. What I'm going to ask you to do is to simply pause the video and take 2 minutes to set up the two-step verification. This is necessary. Without it, we can't actually perform this email sending. So please go ahead, pause the video, use two-step verification. You just need to connect your Gmail account to a mobile number and then come back here. So now that you're done with two-step verification, I hope you didn't have much trouble with it. You're going to get this screen right here, and you're going to have a new tab right here, which is called App Passwords. Now, App Passwords will enable you to create external passwords for external applications to use to access your Gmail account. And obviously, we want one that will work with our PyQt5 application. So we're going to go to App Passwords, and then it's going to ask you to sign in, of course. So go ahead, sign in. So I've signed in, and as you can see, in my case, I have one app password. So in your case, you're going to have 0, and what you're going to want to do is come back here, select app, go to other, give it a custom name, maybe PyQt5 as I have in the first instance, or Python, or my app, or whatever you want, and then you're going to press on generate. This will generate a 16-character password for you. So let me see if I can actually access mine from here to show you. Okay, I can't, so I'm just simply going to come here and create another one. I'm just going to name this one Python app, and then press on generate. And this will give me a 16-character password, and this is the password that you're going to want to copy and paste in this password guy right here. Okay, so this is what you want to do, and after you paste it here, you're going to be able to access your email via this program that we built in Python. Okay, so this is simply how we're going to do it. You definitely need to go through the steps of creating a two-step verification for your account and then creating an app password. I'm not going to use the new one that I just created. I'm actually going to trash it. I'm going to use the old one that I created in PyQt5, and I don't think they're allowing me to show it to you guys, but anyway, the code for it is right here. So this is the password that was created for me the first time. Again, I highly stress, this isn't the password I assigned to this Gmail account. This is the password that was actually provided here when I created my app passwords in my burner account, and I gave access to an external app. Why does this work? Well, basically here's what it says. It says app password lets you sign into your Google account from apps on devices that don't support two-step verification. So it's sort of a hack. It allows you to sign into your account from this, so what they call an insecure application, because this application isn't like the height of security. This is just a demo project application that we're building together just to show off our PyQt5 skills. But essentially, this is what this small hack is doing. It's allowing us to access our Gmail, assuming we don't have two-step verification there. Alright, so now that we're able to actually access this Gmail, we can move on from this and go back to our email account. As you can see, I'm getting maybe a bunch of security alerts. You will get those as you create those app passwords. This is why I highly stress for you to create a brand new Gmail account. I don't want you to do this on your own personal accounts. This is definitely not secure, especially if you actually leak this app password. Alright, let's actually come back here. Now, one thing I want you to note is that here you don't actually have to type the password itself. You might have it be more secure by saving this as an environment variable, but for now we're going to keep it inside a string just so things are clearer for you and you can actually see where the email is, where the password is, and where sort of everything is going on. Alright, after creating the password itself, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use SSL to create a context. This will enable us to actually encrypt our emails. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to write these 2 lines of code, which I'm going to explain right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to say with SMTP-lib, so with this library, the SMTP, create an instance of SMTP SSL. You have to pass things like the SMTP server, which is the Gmail one, the port, which we already defined up here, as well as the context, which we defined right here as SMTP. So you call this guy as SMTP, and then finally here what I say is smtp.login. So I call the login function on my sender and the password. For now, all I did is simply log into this account. So this is what I actually wanted to do. Okay, so this is the code we need in order to be able to actually log in. Now the very final step that we will add is the following line of code, which is smtp.sendMail. So this is what will enable us to actually send the email we were talking about. We will send it from this sender to this recipient on this, so we will send these email contents. So this is the code that will enable us to send this email. Now again, we're calling this function send email from PyQt5. We're calling it on the contents of the line edit and the text edit. We send these recipient and the email to this function. It does all of this stuff right here, and then finally it will actually send the email itself. Now, let's actually verify whether this will work. So we're sending it from the code first burner account. Let's run the application and see whether this will actually work. So I'm going to press on run. Here's my application. Now, who will my recipient be? It's going to be the other burner account that I created. Let's go back here. And here, what you will see is this is the email. So tutorialcodefirst@gmail.com. Again, very creative names. Let's actually paste this. And here I'm going to type, hi, this is an email sent with Python, let's actually say sent with Python, great, and with a smiley face. So this is my email, and now what I'm going to do is I will simply press on the send email button. Now it says email sent, however the app is still executing. This print statement is this one right here. So now the app is executing, therefore this function is being executed. As you can see, it will send this information to this function, which will do all of the SMTP stuff to actually send the email. So now I'm waiting for the app to finish, and I'm still waiting for everything to happen. Actually, my bad, this app will not stop executing because we haven't asked it to. So the email should have been sent. Let's actually go to our other burner account. Now there's really nothing in the inbox. What we can do is refresh. If you still don't find something in your inbox, one thing you actually want to check is the spam. So we can see one in the spam, and there it is. So you can see code first burner 1. So this is the code first burner 1. And here's the email. So hi, this is an email sent with Python, and great. So why is this message in spam? I mean, it does look pretty spammy. The accounts are fairly new. I mean, if I was Gmail, I would raise a red flag. Now we're just doing this for the project purposes, so it's fine if it's spam. We just have to say it's not spam and tell Gmail that it isn't spam. So let's just go back to our inbox, find it here. But yeah, that's really cool. We were able to send an email from one Gmail account to another using Python. I mean, it keeps flagging it as spam, but yeah, that's really the point, not the point of this tutorial. Okay, so we were able to actually send this email using this interface that you have right here. So the very last thing we're going to do is we're going to add some minor validation just to make the application make more sense. So what we want is that we want to check whether the line edit is empty. By line edit, I mean the one for the recipient, because you don't want to send an email to no recipient, right? So you have to check whether a recipient here actually exists. Of course, there are further steps like checking whether the email format is correct, but we're not actually going to do that in this video because it's a very basic and beginner tutorial. However, if you actually want to see how that can be done, do let me know in the comments and I can just type it up real quick. But for now, what we're going to do is the following. We want to check if the line edit is empty. So I'm just going to clear this print statement since we don't need it anymore. I'm just going to check if self.lineEdit.text. So just to check whether this line edit is empty. So let's actually just indent this. What this is checking is whether there actually exists some text inside this line edit. Now else, in case it's actually empty and there's no text there, what we're going to want to use is something called a Q message box, which will enable us to create this pop-up window that will show us that we have an error. So we'll just call this message and it's going to be a Q message box. And then what we will do is simply message.execute. Okay, and this Q message box obviously has to be imported. We import it from PyQt5.QtDesigner, so we will say Q message box. Perfect. So now that we have imported this, we can actually use it. Let's actually run the app and try it out. So I'm not going to write anything in the recipient. I'm just going to press on send email, and you can see I got a little pop-up right here. Nothing is really inside of it, you just have an OK button, but this is a good starting point. This is how we will create a message box, which is the pop-up. Perfect. So now that we have created it, we're going to just modify a few properties just to make it look more like an error message. Firstly, we will change the icon, so we will say .set icon, and the icon itself will be Q message box.critical. So it's critical with uppercase C, simply to just say that you have to use the error icon. So let's actually press on email. You can see the error icon right here. So now we have this red X telling us, okay, there was an error that occurred. Other than that, what we want to do is we want to simply message.set text. So this will be the text that will be displayed inside this pop-up. So we will say invalid recipient. Let's actually run it back up again. Press on send email. You can see the invalid recipient. The last thing I'm going to change is the window title. So you can see here it says Python. I'm just going to message.set window title. I'm just going to call this error. This should be pretty self-explanatory. Let's run it. Press on this again, and as you can see, we have an error and we have this pop-up right here. Alright, so that's really it for this video. We managed to design this UI, send some emails using Python, and then finally include some minor validation just to have a few pop-up messages and not allow the user to send an email to an empty recipient. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today we're building this text editor using Python, PyQt5 and QtDesigner. So this tutorial is beginner friendly. The only thing I ask of you is that you have PyQt5 and QtDesigner installed. I have a very short 4-minute video where I show you how to install them and get them set up. I will link it in the description. Please do set them up and come back to this video so that you can follow the tutorial. Alright, so what does this text editor do? It behaves exactly like Notepad. You can type any text that you like. You can come here and then you can open up also existing text files. So for example, I open up demo.txt. You can see here this was changed from untitled to the actual name of this text file. So you have the path and the file name, so demo.txt. Here I have the content, so excuse all this gibberish, but then what you can do is you can erase it. So if I erase this content, I come here and I press save. I go to demo.txt and you can see that the file was changed. I can also write new content, save it again, and again, as you can see, the new content was added to my txt file. So we're able to write to files and save, as well as open up existing files. Another thing you can do, you can save as, which will open up a file dialog that allows you to save this in a new file. So I'm going to call this demo3, for example, and it will save as demo3.txt. I come here and I have this demo3. It has the exact same contents as the first demo file, which is the one that we saved as. So these are 3 actually 4 functions in which you can have file management. Again, I can press new. This will change to untitled, and now we have a blank slate in which we can write our text all over again. Okay, these are the basics. Now, what else can you do? I can type anything here, and I can come use these edit functions. I have undo, can undo again, and then again and again. I can redo, which will bring back the text that I just undoed. I can select a part of it and here and cut. I can also copy and then come back here and paste. So here, edit, paste. I can use also the keyboard functions to paste, cut, copy, and undo and redo, because here you have these shortcuts, and these shortcuts are all fully functional. You can use them to undo or redo. Okay, now that you are able to manage the files as well as edit your text, you can also edit the appearance of your text editor. For example, you can set the dark mode, and this will change our interface to have this nice looking dark mode in which the background is gray and black and the text is in white. It's also fully responsive and resizable, so as you resize your window, nothing gets misplaced and it's not buggy, so everything remains in the same position and it gets resized pretty well. Another thing, you can set it back to light mode. You can also highlight something and increase its font size. So as you can see, we're increasing the font size. You can also decrease the font size. So bring it back. And yeah, these are some features we're going to code today in this text editor. How will this work? Well, first we're going to build and design the interface using QTDesigner, which is the separate tool that PyQt5 provides. Then we're going to come back to Python, come back here and write the code for every single one of these functions. Now, note that I'm using Visual Studio Code. You can use any Python text editor you like, so long as you're able to run Python and you're comfortable with it. Other than that, that is really it. It's definitely beginner friendly. I do suggest you follow this tutorial if you are a beginner. So yeah, that's really it for all the information. Again, to install PyQt5 and QtDesigner, refer to the description. Source code is also in the description down below if you want to refer to it as you are watching this video. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how we will create this interface that you see right here, link it to some basic functions before then adding more complex functionalities. So the first thing we do is we have QTDesigner open. Now, if it's your first time using QTDesigner, I do have a video in which I show you how it works and the different features of it in depth. However, you don't necessarily need to watch it before watching this video because I will cover the basics anyway as we use it. So this is QTDesigner. What I'm going to do, so this is the interface I have pre-prepared in order to save time during this video, but I'm going to show you how you can create the same interface from scratch. So I'm just going to go File and New, and this will pull up this form right here. And now I'm going to select Main Window, so I will use a Q main window. My application will have only one window anyways, so this will be our choice. So I will create this Q main window. So I press on Create, and you can see it pulls up this very similar interface right here. So for now, this guy is totally blank, and what we're going to do is the following. We're going to add this menu bar right here and add the different menu items, and we're going to add a little place here for our text editor, which will allow us to edit the text. So before I add the menu bar, I am going to add my text edit. So you can see here you have line edit, you have text edit, you have plain text edit, but we're going to use the text edit. The difference is that the line edit only allows you to have one line, and the text edit will allow you to have multiple lines, which is more desirable when you're building a text editor. So I'll bring a text edit over here, and then what I'm going to do to make sure that this text edit will remain centered and will be responsive as I resize my window, because it's super important for us to resize the window and have the same sort of appearance, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to go to Layout, and then I'm going to say Layout in a grid. So this will create a grid, and this has expanded my text edit to be as big as my central widget. So you can see here you have the central widget. And now if I resize it, this should be responsive. So let me just explain a bit what's going on here. Our Q main window is the parent widget. So think of it as sort of a hierarchy or a tree of different widgets. So you have the main window, and then inside the main window, you have three things. You have the central widget, you have the menu bar, and the status bar. Also here, I'm using something called the object inspector, which allows me to see all the different objects I have on my screen. So now Now that I have added a text edit, this text edit is now inside the central widget. I also chose to lay out the central widget in a grid. So now if I preview, and that's also something you can do with QTDesigner, you can go to which one was it? Form preview, yeah, this one. Okay, and I usually use Control R. So you can preview it and you can see how it would look like when you run it through Python. So now if I resize it, you can see that the text editor is resizing and I can type anything inside of it. So this is what I mean by responsive. It's resizable. As you resize your screen, this text edit will grow and it will still look nice and presentable. So it's not a certain set size. Okay, so now we've added the text edit part. Now that I've added this, also just to repeat, so for previewing, you can either use the shortcut Control R, or you can go to Form and Preview. And this will show you how the interface will look like, sort of without all these little grid dots that you see right here. This is how it will look like when you run it through Python. So this is how the interface will look like at the start. Okay, so now that we've added the interface right here, the next thing we want to do is actually add this menu bar. So we set the QMain window by default. It has a central widget, it has a menu bar and a status bar. So we're not actually going to talk about the status bar for now. We'll look at it later on in the video. But for now, we're going to edit the menu bar before we get started and adding our functions and using the code. So the menu bar is this guy right here. You have this in virtually any typical standard application these days. You'll always have like these file, edit, view, things like that. These are typically very common. I have a video specifically talking about the menu bar, but again, I will go through it in this video. Okay, so this is the menu bar. You can see in the window that I previously designed, you have these different menu items. Now, if I Control R to preview, you can see that if I press on this, you have new, you have open, save, save as, and you have different options or actions for every single menu. So these are all different queue menus, and then these guys are all queue actions. So this is the type of this widget. Okay, so we want to create this menu bar. One thing we notice actually when we're previewing this guy, you can see that there's no menu bar. This is because we haven't added any menus to this menu bar. So PyQt5 by default, it will hide it because there's nothing really inside of it. So let's actually come here and create the very same menu that we have right here. So this type here, all I have to do is double click and then I just have to type. So I just typed file. I can type here again and type edit, type here again and type appearance and things like that. Okay, next what I do is I come here inside the file and this is where I have to add some queue actions. So obviously you have a menu, but inside each menu you have some actions. These actions can be things like opening up a new file, saving your file, things like that. It's pretty straightforward. So here's what we're going to do. I'm just going to double click here and now I'm just going to say new and it will just add the new here. And then now what I have to do is maybe add save, save as, things like that. You can also add a separator between the different ones. So here what we have is we have a separator between new, open, and save as. Okay, we can do the same for edit. So I'm just doing something similar. I'm not going to necessarily redo the entire window. So I did pre-prepare it just to save time. So what I can do is I can say undo, redo. These guys are pretty common in most text editors. I can add a separator. So this will add this like little line. And then I can come here and I can say copy, cut and paste. Okay, and now if I Control R, I preview it, you can see that these guys were created. So let me talk a bit about what these guys are. Again, I said that each item in the menu bar is called a menu, and you can see that right here in the object inspector. So you can see menu bar, you have a queue menu bar, then inside it you have menu file, which is this menu right here. Then inside it you have 3 actions and you have a separator as well. So you have queue action, queue action, queue action, queue action, and these are all different queue actions. So what do I mean when I say something is a queue menu or is a queue action? This is the Python class that this widget belongs to. So this widget is an instance of this Python class. This means that all of these guys, they are by nature queue actions. They belong to this class. And the menus, they belong to something called the queue menu. And you can see the same thing for edit. You have queue menu and then you have queue action, queue action, queue action, things like that. Okay, So this is how we were able to create this menu bar. Now, if I preview it, you can see them, they exist, and the Q menu bar is apparent now and it's not hidden anymore. Okay, so now we were able to create it. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to close this and I'm going to delete this one since we don't really need it, since I already prepared it. And we're going to turn our focus to this UI that I already created. So this is essentially the same thing. You have this text editor, and then you have, if I preview, you have these menu items. So you have new, open, save, save as. So I showed you in the beginning of the video what each of these guys does. So what we're going to do is now we're going to link our interface to the code, and then one by one I will implement the functionalities of these different functions. All right, so now I'm just going to close this and I'm going to head to VS Code, where we're going to write some code to link this UI into our Python code. So as usual, I am using VS Code. However, you can use any Python text editor that you like. You can even use Notepad, you can use Atom, Sublime Text, you can use an IDE such as PyCharm. So this is totally up to you. However, here I prefer to use VS Code, but you should use whatever you are comfortable with. Okay, so in front of me right here, I have some starter code which will enable me to load this UI into my Python code. So here inside my project, let me just actually show you how the project looks like. I have a folder, it's called PyQt5 text editor. I have a main.py file which contains some Python code. We'll look at it in just a second. And I also have the main.ui file. The main.ui file is the UI file that I saved here. So if you save your UI file, this will save in a .ui file format. So what does this .ui file mean? This is essentially an XML file. So if I open it up, this is XML. And it sort of contains all your interface which you created using drag and drop and the different tools and functionalities in QTDesigner. It will save them all here as an XML format. So it's a special type of XML format. And now you can see all the different details that we have. So you can see here you have Q menu called menu file, which is what we had right here. And then inside it, you have different actions. So you have action new, action open, the separator, action save as, things like that. So all of our actions, our menus, they're all coded inside this main.ui file. And now I'm going to show you how you could load this UI into your Python file. Now, if you've seen many videos on my channel, you've probably heard this a lot. So I've gone through the same starter code multiple times in multiple videos. However, if you're new, don't worry because I'm going to go through it all over again right now. Okay, so first we have our imports. Let's actually just ignore the few things that we have here and let's talk about our imports. Firstly, from PyQt5.QtWidgets, you're going to have to import QMainWindow and QApplication. So why QMainWindow? We already said that when we created this interface here in Designer, this window, we used a QMainWindow. You can actually see it right here. So this is our parent widget. Okay, next is QApplication. So every single PyQt5 app needs one instance of a QApplication in order to be executed. Essentially, you want to execute your app, so you need a QApplication. Okay, next you have from PyQt5.uic import load UI. This will enable us to load the UI from QTDesigner into our Python code. How? I'll show you in a second. But for now, this is what the import looks like. You will also need to import sys, and I'll show you why as we go through the code. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to define a class. So here, this class will represent our main window. I named it main. You can name the class anything you like. It does not have to be main. Okay? Next, this class will inherit QMainWindow. Now, if you're not very familiar with basic Python object-oriented programming principles, inheritance basically means that this main class that we are defining has the exact same properties as the QMainWindow. So that class called QMainWindow, it will have the same properties, but with some additional things that we are going to define ourselves. That's the most basic interpretation of how this inheritance things work. So because our class here, because our interface is a QMainWindow, it has to inherit a QMainWindow. Now, if this was a QDialog, it would have to inherit a QDialog. But for now, it will inherit a QMainWindow because it is one. Simply, that's how it is. Okay? Next, we define the constructor function or the init function of my class. Again, this is basic Python object-oriented programming stuff. Okay, so the init function is what will get executed as soon as you instantiate an object from this class. So as soon as you create an instance of this class, this init function will be run. What does this mean? That when I first create a main, this function will get executed. Now, what does this super thing here mean? Essentially, we're saying that you should call the superclass, which means the one that we're getting inherited from, so the main window is the superclass here. Call these superclasses init function. So this is mandatory because we have to initialize the QMain window. Next, this is where all the magic happens. We have this load UI file. This load UI file will simply load main.ui. So here, this main.ui file that we created, it will load it into my class, and it will also take as parameter self. So what does this do? It will take all the different widgets and objects and elements in this main.ui file, so the Q menu, the menu bar, the action, all those things, and it will load them as class variables inside main. So this is how this would work. You would load these guys and they would become attributes of this class. How? I will show you later on. So for now, this is how you load. Don't worry too much about what exactly is going on behind the scenes because I will show you that when we use it. Okay? Finally, now that we've defined our class, inside our main function, what we're going to do is we will simply create an app. So it's a Q application, as we already mentioned. Every time we want to execute a PyQt5 app, you need to create a Q application. So app will be an instance of this Q application. We will pass the system arguments to this Q application. This is mandatory. Even though we're not essentially explicitly writing any arguments ourselves, this is mandatory to execute the application. Next, what we're going to do is we will create an instance of our main class. So this will be our window or our widget. So this is main. And we create an instance of it. Then we have to show it. So every time you create a window in PyQt5, you have to show it so that the user can actually see it. And finally, we just say app.execute. Okay, so now let me run it actually and show you what this starter code produces. So if I run it, you can see that it opens up the same window that we created in PyQt5 Designer. And you can see that we have all these different menu items. We have the text editor, it's also resizable. And yeah, we were able to actually load our design, which we created manually using drag and drop and our different buttons and functionalities. We were able to load it into our Python code. Okay, so now what are we going to do? We're going to actually start to add functions to these different menu items. Essentially, what I want from my application is that when I click new, I want it to open up a new file. When I click open, I want it to open a file dialog and allow me to select a file. When I click undo, I want it to undo what I just wrote in the text editor, and so on. So each of these guys has to have a certain functionality. So how do I do so? Well, I'm going to show you how you can start by linking these actions to functions. So how do we do that? Okay, let's actually go back here and have this new part of the code. So what is this part actually doing? Here we're calling something called self.actionNew. What is action new? Let's go back to designer and let me show you. So I'm just going to go to view right here and I'm just going to say action editor, and this will pull up this action editor right here. Okay, what is this action editor showing me? It's showing me a list of all the different actions I have in my screen. So here I have the actions cut, copy, paste, save as, new, open. All of these guys, the ones that we created in this interface, they are all here. So here they are in this action editor. So this is where I can get the names of these actions. Okay, sorry, I just moved that around, but let me just make it bigger. Okay, so action new. This is the action associated with the new right here. So this is what enables us to create a new file. So, and when I said that load UI loads this UI file as attributes of this class, now I'm able to access it using self.actionNew. So as you can see here, it's as if we have a variable or an attribute of our class called actionNew. Now, even though we didn't explicitly define it ourselves, it was loaded using this load UI function, which is the beauty of this load UI. Okay, next, what I'm going to say is dot triggered. What does dot triggered mean? Dot triggered means that this action was clicked. So in a way, it was triggered. So here you're saying, when this action is triggered, or when this action is clicked, do something, right? We want to open up a new file. What I'm going to do is I'm going to connect it. So we say dot connect to self.newFile, which is a function I've defined right here. So again, what we're saying is when this action, self.actionNew, when the new action is triggered, when it's clicked, connect me to function new file, which exists right here. So what's inside this function? So this function new file, it will print out new file clicked. So this is just a print statement. It doesn't open up a new file or anything yet, but it's just a print statement. So how does this work? Let's actually demo it. We run it, okay? And we move this here. So now if I press on file, if I press on open, nothing happens because we haven't linked anything to open. But if I press on new, you can see that new file clicked was printed. So what we said is that when action new is triggered, connect me to self.newFile. This will print out a new statement. So this is essentially how this works. You're waiting for a trigger, which is an event. The event here being that it was clicked or triggered. So this action was clicked or triggered. And then you will connect this to a function which will get executed. This is how the basic thing here works. Now, essentially, as we develop this interface, our goal is to have a different function attached to every single one of these guys. So we want the undo to perform undo, redo to redo, cut, copy, paste, all of these things. They will all have their own function. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually come here. I'm just going to clear this code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste all of these functions right here. So what are these functions? What did I just do? I simply just redid everything and in the same way that I did the action new. So again, what do I have here? I have self.actionSave. So what is action save? If we go to designer, you have action save here, and this is this guy. So it's save here. And what I did is I connected it to dot triggered. So I waited for it to get triggered, dot connect to a function save file. Save file will print out save file clicked. The same goes for all the different other functions. So now I'm just going to demo it for you. The reason I copy pasted it is simply because it would save us a lot of time. I don't want you to just watch me type this stuff and repeat over and over again. So let me actually resize this guy and show you the output of the code. So here I have my main window. If I press on new, you have new file clicked. If I press on open, you have open file clicked. You have save file clicked, save file as, okay, undo, redo, and so on. So I added this print statement for every single one of these guys. Okay, so I just showed you how I was able to add all of them. Why did I add this? So what is the point of me doing all of this? Obviously, for now, they don't have the functionalities that we desire. We want each of them to perform the action that they're supposed to perform. Well, this is just me demoing how this works. What we're going to do next is then we're going to just fill in these functions and rewrite them to do different things. So here I'm just going to remove the print and I'm just going to say open new file, and this is where I will write my code. But for now, we're going to leave them as such because this is for the sake of the demo. This is how we will progress through the video. Okay, one last thing related to the interface that I will do now before moving on is adding keyboard shortcuts. So another thing that Q menu bars can do, for these actions, you can add keyboard shortcuts. So I'm just going to pull up the property editor, okay? And now I'm going to click on new. So you have here action new Q action. This means we're editing the property Q action. Okay, what am I going to do? I will come here to shortcut, press on it, and it says press shortcut. So on my keyboard, now you can't see it, obviously, but what I'm going to press is Control N, and you can see that Control N is now the shortcut for this new file. So now if I preview again, you can see here that we have Control N next to our new. So how will this look like through the code? Well, if I come here, stop my program and rerun it, okay, so you can see it. You have new and it has Control N next to it. If I press on it, obviously it says new file clicked. However, What if I decide to just press Ctrl N? So you can see I'm not moving my cursor, I'm using just my keyboard. And it will also print out new file clicked. And this is how we're able to add keyboard shortcuts, which are a property of literally any text editor that you use. They all have different shortcuts. This is how I was able to add them. So I'm just going to close this one as well. And then I'm just going to add some shortcuts right here. So I won't add shortcuts for all of them, but you kind of get the point. So I'm just going to say for save, I'm just going to add the shortcut Control S. And I think that's enough. So for edit, undo, it's probably going to be Control Z. So I'm just using the common shortcuts that you will find in most text editors. So this is common for plenty of text editors. For redo, I will use Control Y. And for cut, I will say it's Control X. For copy, it's Control C. And for paste, it's Control V. So I'm not going to add any other shortcuts for the appearance and for the save as and the open. Actually, I can add one for the open and save as, I guess. So I can just say Control O for open. And for save as, we can say Control Shift S. So on my keyboard, I just have to select Control Shift S, and this will get added automatically here. Okay, so I just added these shortcuts. So let me run it just to show you. So if I run it, you have the window here, and you can see that these shortcuts are now, they have appeared here. So next, what I'm going to do, so again, if I just click on save, or if I just use Control S, you have save file clicked. So if I Control S again, you can see I'm not clicking anything with my mouse. It's printing out save file clicked. Control O will print out open file clicked, and yeah, things like that. So this is how these keyboard shortcuts will work. Okay, so what do we have now? Now we have created all these different actions. So we have here 4, and here we have 5, and here we have another 3. So we have all of these actions that we've created. For now, what they all do is that they print out different print statements. What I'm going to do next is I will start to fill out these functions one by one with the appropriate functionality, so with the correct functionalities. Okay, so let's actually start doing that. So we're going to start by coding the functions for the easiest actions. So we're going to start with these guys right here, namely because they are much easier to develop than the other features. So we'll get to those throughout the video, but first we're going to start with these 5 as they are the most straightforward. Okay, so here we have this edit. These guys are usually related to the text editor itself. So whenever I type something, I want to be able to undo it. So I want to be able to undo, redo, then cut, copy, or paste. So coding these is pretty straightforward because the text edit widget that PyQt5 provides by default comes with these functions. So all we need to do is code them and make sure that they get triggered. What do I mean by this? So for undo, we already said that we have when action undo is triggered, it's going to connect us to the function undo. So I'm going to start with this undo function. I'm just going to minimize the 4 functions that we're ignoring for now, which are the new, open, save, and save as, and we're going to start with the undo. For now, we print undo clicked. It's very easy to just say that I want it to undo whatever I just typed inside my text editor. How do I do that? Simply, I will just say self.text edit.undo and call the function. So what is self.textEdit? If we go back to our PyQt5 QtDesigner, this guy right here is a text edit, and the object name in our property editor is text edit. Now I can change this to be edit or editor or things like that. So for now, let's actually just keep it as text edit. And then when I call it using the self.textEdit, this is how I'm able to call this attribute from my main class, and I'm just calling its function, which is the undo function. So the undo, redo, cut, copy, and paste, they come by default with any text edit in PyQt5. So now if I actually run it, I'm just going to show you how this will work. I have something highlighted. Let me actually run it. Okay, here we go. So now I'm just going to type anything, and I'm just going to press edit, undo, and you can see the text was removed. Okay, so I can also do this using the keyboard shortcut Control Z that we have defined. How do I do that? Well, I can just come here, type some stuff, And now I can just Control Z, and you can see that the stuff was erased. So it was undo. Okay, very simple, very straightforward. We are very lucky because the text editor in PyQt5 itself does provide us with these built-in functions. So we don't have to code anything ourselves other than just an explicit function call. Okay, we will do the same for redo, for cut, copy, and paste as well. Okay, sorry. So now I'm just going for redo, just self.textedit.redo. And now for this one, I will say self.textedit.cut, and I'll do the others after we demo it. So now I'll run it. So let's say I will just type anything. Then I'm just going to come to edit and undo. And then I'm just going to come to edit and redo. Okay, so perfect. So now you can see that we were able to have this different, like these two different functionalities. Now again, I can undo the second part on its own, and now I can redo it as well. I can have a sequence of undos. So you can see here I'm removing the new line, and now I can redo as well. So I can also use these shortcuts, so Control Y, and you can see that the text is back. So the undo and redo, they are done, they work, and it's very, very straightforward. So it was just one line of code for us. Next, I can highlight, and I can just come here, edit, and cut. So I can cut it. Did I not use cut? So what's the other? Right here, let me just actually check out. Oh, okay, so this, we actually added the cut in the copy. So my bad, I'm just going to copy this and add it to the cut itself. So that was an error on my end. I'm just going to change copy to be copy. So now I can actually run it, and it should probably work. So let me just type anything, highlight a certain part. Let me not highlight the whole thing, edit and cut. So you can see the cut works, it erases the part, and it also added it to our clipboard. Now I'll show you how the paste works in a second. Another thing you can do is you can come here and you can also copy. We just added that functionality as well. So finally we have the paste. So out of all these guys, this is the last one. So self.textedit.paste. Okay, so I'm just going to close this, run it again. And let's say we can just use paste directly. This will paste what we last copied when we had the previous run. So it's not exclusive to the run itself. This will add it to your own operating system's clipboard. Okay, so I can also copy it again and paste it once more. I use the keyboard shortcut now. Another thing I can do is I can type more stuff, and I can select a part of it, and I can cut. I can come to a new line, and I can paste it. I can also undo, obviously, and redo. So for these functionalities, super easy, super straightforward. Again, we used one line of code for each of these 5 different functions. The other functionalities, not as straightforward, but we'll get to those in a second. But essentially, this is how you can add these different edit functionalities right here. They come by default using the text editor, which is, the text edit, which is a type of PyQt5 widget. So it's the Q text edit. And they're very easy to call using one line of code. You just have to call the function itself. Okay, so that's it for this part. So the next functions we're going to code are the new and the open functions. After that, we'll get started with the save and the save as. So for the new, now ideally in any text editor, when you use new, you're going to clear this code, the text that you had written right here, and then you are sort of writing to a brand new file and not to the old file that you had open. So the way we're going to do this is through 2 simple steps. The first step is we're going to clear the text edit. So now, whenever I just type stuff, and let's say I'm just editing a file and I press new, what I want is not to print out new file clicked as we already have it. I actually want to clear all of this and have a blank file. So how do I do so? It's also a very simple function. So I'm just going to expand this .new file function. Again, we have the action new. When it's triggered, we get connected to the self.new file function. So this is a function that we have defined. Previously, we were just printing stuff. Now what we're going to do is we're going to clear the contents of the text edit. So self.textedit, again, here I'm referring to the text edit that I have on my screen. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say .clear. And this should clear the text of whatever text edit we have. So now I'm just going to run it. And what I'm going to do is just type random stuff, and then now I'm just going to come here and I'm going to press on new, and this will clear my text edit contents. Again, what I can do again is I can save and use my keyboard shortcut, so Control N, and this will also clear the contents of my text edit. So perfect, we have sort of the first step of creating a new file. Now, one thing I also want to change to give the user an indication of that they're writing in a new file is I want to change the title of this window. So for now, you can see the title of the window is simply main window, which is the default that PyQt5 designer gave us. But we want to change this to be untitled when we open up a new text file. So here's what we're going to do. We're simply going to say self.set window title. And here we're going to pass the string that will be set as the title. And in this case, we're just going to say untitled. Usually when you create a new file in Notepad or in Word, it will usually start by being called untitled, and then later on when you save it, you will give it a title or a file name. So now let me run it, and I'm going to type anything. And now if I just press on new, you can see that the window was changed to untitled, indicating that this is a new file, it's a blank file, it's untitled, it's never been saved before. This is a brand new file. So this is how we're going to code the new function. 2 lines of code. First, we clear the contents of the text edit, and second, we change the title. Okay, so this is a good indication that we are in a new file. Now, another thing I want to do is I want to actually open up an existing file. Now, how do I do that? Well, I've already added inside the project here this demo.txt file, which it just says this is a sample text file, example text file, and welcome to my file. So I had to add anything in here. And we're going to use this. We're going to open it from our text editor and load this textual content inside the UI. By the way, I'm not sure if I already mentioned this, but the source code is linked in the description down below under the video, so make sure to check that out if you want to receive all of these files. Okay, so we now want to code the open file function. I'm going to expand it, and I'm going to clear this guy right here. So to open a file, you have to actually open something called a file dialog. Now, I have a video I made on this probably a long time ago, so maybe about 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago, in which I showed you how you can open a file dialog with PyQt5 and browse for files. Well, you don't have to watch it unless you want to, obviously, for more information, but I'm going to go through the very simple basics here. So what do we want to do? Simply, I'm just going to say, I'm going to create a variable called file name, which will contain the name of our file that we opened. And I'm going to say QFile dialog. And you can see that VS Code highlighted for me because it's not imported. So I'm just going to scroll up, and here from QTWidgets, I'm going to also import QFile dialog. So this is part of PyQt5.QtWidgets. Okay, so now I have QFile dialog, and I'm just going to say .get open file name. So this will get the name of the file that I've opened, and I will simply just open up a parenthesis here and pass the following arguments. So the following arguments will first be self. So self is necessary because this is part of the class. Next, I'm going to give a title to my file dialog. So this will be open file. I'll show you where it is in a second. And finally, I have to give the path of where I want to start by looking for files. If I don't give a path, this will start to look in my default directory on my PC. I'm going to give a path and tell it, please look in d/code, okay, sorry, so code1st.io, and then I'm just going to say PyQt5 text editor. So this is my current directory. This is where I have my current folder open. Okay, editor. Okay, perfect. So here, in your case, you don't have to add this path. You have to add your own path. You have to add your own directory. You don't even have to say, it doesn't even have to be the same project directory. This could be my documents, you know? So this could be a path to your documents folder on your desktop, or something, another folder within your documents, things like that. So it's your choice here. This is just the default where the file dialog will be opened. And finally, I have to specify the default file type. We don't want to open up an image and have it not load in our text editor and cause a crash. We just want to open text files. So here I'm just going to say text files, and I'm going to open up a pair of parentheses like this, and now I'm just going to say star.txt. Basically here I'm saying the file type must be txt, and this is fname. Okay, so for now this is just what I'm going to do. I'm going to run it and show you what the file dialog looks like. So if I come here, file, and open, this will open up my current directory. So this is the directory I added, so D, Code1st.io, PyQt5 text editor. And you have here, you can see text files. So this is what we wrote, and it says .txt. Note that it says text files because we told it to write text files. So here I could have said text documents or text or notepad files or whatever. So this is our choice. This is what you write, and it gets reflected here in this file dialog. And you only have .txt, so this is the type of files that we can get, which are text documents. As you can see in this directory, we already have a .py file and a .ui file. They don't appear here simply because we said we specifically want .txt documents. Okay? And finally, this open file that we said at the start, this is the title of my file dialog. You can see it right here, so it says open file. Again, you can write anything you want here. This is simply the title. So now, if I double click on this and I open it, nothing happened because we haven't coded anything to happen, but essentially this is the file that we opened. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to just print something just to show you. I'm going to print, okay, actually, let me tab this. So I'm going to print fname sub 0. Because this returns two arguments, we have to get the first one, which is the file name. So now, let me run it again. Press open, and I'm going to just click on open and open up this demo.txt file. So you can see here what was printed in our output is the path to this file, including the file name. So this is the file name that we were able to print. We were able to retrieve it from this Q file dialog. So we sort of did the first half of the code. Okay, the next thing I want to do is actually I want to set my window title. Similarly to how before I set it to be untitled, I want to set it to actually be fname sub 0. So now rather than untitled, I want it to be fname sub 0. Why is that? This is because you want to give the user an indication of what file they're currently editing. As you can see, VS Code currently tells me that I'm editing main.py. And this is inside the folder PyQt5 text editor. This is important because it helps the user figure out inside what file they're currently writing their text. So now if I run it and I come here and I open up the demo, you can see the title was changed to the path and then finally the demo.txt file name. This is very good because it gives the user an indication of where they're currently writing their stuff. Okay, so obviously we not only want to change the title, we actually want to load the text right here. This is done through a very simple Python read operation. So here, this isn't really related to PyQt5 itself. Mostly this is about reading from a file. This is typical basic Python. So although you might not know this, so this is how this will work. So I'm just going to say with open, and I'm just going to say fname sub 0. So this is the file name itself. And then I'm going to open it up as a read mode. So I don't want to write to this file, I just want to read from it. And I open up the file as f. So this is the file reader. Finally, I will just say file text. I'm going to save the text inside a variable. And I'm going to say f.read. So this is how I read the text. Now that I have the text here inside this file text, what I will do is I will set the text of our text edit. So I will say self.textedit.setText. And now I will set the file text like so. So what I'm saying is take the file text from the file and set it inside my text edit. So now if I run it, I'm going to file, open. I'm going to choose the demo.txt, and you can see the contents of that demo file were loaded right here in the text edit inside my interface. The title was also changed in the window, and we sort of now have this indication that we are editing this file. We have this text here, and I can just add more edits to it. Obviously, later we're going to code how we're going to save these edits to this file, but yeah, this is how we are going to get started with it. This is how the open works. Obviously, again, I can just press on new, and now I have a brand new file. Another thing I can do is I can open it up again, and I can also manipulate the copy the paste and things like that. So all of that is currently working. Okay, so these are the functions that we have working now. Next, we're going to talk about the save and the save as. As I said, the next thing we're going to code is the save functionality. Now, there are two types of behaviors that are typically common when saving a file in any text editor. Actually, I can show you right here in VS Code. If I make any changes and I come here and I just press save, given that I already have a file open, save will simply just save the changes in this file without prompting me to open up a file dialog and rename the file. However, when I say save as, what happens is it opens a file dialog, it says save as, and it asks me to type in a new name for the file. So I can just call this main2.py. Okay, and you can see main2.py gets created and the name changes. What I'm going to do actually is delete this, since I just did this for example, and back to main. But yeah, this is how save as works. And save can do either of those things depending on whether the file is known. Given that main is already open and we're typing stuff in it, it will save without opening a file dialog. However, if this file was untitled, let me just type anything and I just press Ctrl S to save, it will open up a file dialog. So this is the type of behavior that we want to think about. Let's actually write this behavior in the code. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to keep track on whether we have a file open. As we said before, let's actually run it and look at it. If I open a file, now I have demo.txt open. Now, how can my Python code know that a current file is open? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come here in my init function. I'm going to define a new property called current path. And this variable will contain the following information. At first, it will be none. Essentially what I'm saying, if current path is none, then there will be no file currently open. When I open a file, I want to update this current path. So I will come here to the open, and then this is what I will change. I will say self.current path, and I will set it to be equal to fname sub0, which is the file that we opened, which I talked about like a few minutes ago. Okay? And when I put a new file, what I want to change is I want self.currentPath to be back to none. Because it's untitled, we haven't saved it yet, we have no current path. Now this variable is super important because it will enable me to monitor whether or not we have a current file that's open. This will determine how we're going to save. So let's actually do it right here. We're going to say if current path is not none, okay, if it's not none, that means the current path already exists. What I'm going to do here is I'm just simply going to save the changes without opening dialog, right? Else, if the path actually is none, that means I need to create a new file, and in this case, perform the same action as save as. So I will simply call the save as function, okay? So I will call self.saveas. Now here you see this error simply because we haven't actually written any of the code for the changes. And actually, let me fix this here. This is an error. It's self.currentPath and not current path itself. Okay, so now what I want to do is simply create save my changes without creating any new file. How am I going to do this? Firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to retrieve the text from the text edit itself. I will save this in a variable called called file text, and it will be self.textedit.toPlain text. What does this do? So here we're essentially doing the opposite of what we did in the openFile function. In the openFile function, we got the file and we wrote that stuff, we read that stuff from the file and then wrote it to the text edit. By doing so, we said textedit.setText. Now, when you do toPlain text, you're getting the text from the text edit. And I'm going to show that to you now by doing the following. So I will demo before we actually save this. Okay, so now I opened up the file. I'm going to open this demo.txt. Okay, and I'm just going to type here at the end of it, hello world, and I just made this small edit. Now I'm going to file, save. And this just printed the self.textedit.toPlainText, and it printed out the exact contents of my text edit. So this is just me showing you how this .toPlainText function actually works. Okay, perfect. Now that we have this information, we want to write it to the very same file that we have open. What is the file that we have open? It's actually the current path. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to come here and I'm just going to say with open self.current path. Okay. And in this case, we're opening it in write mode and not read mode. So now we're just simply going to write this stuff to the text file. So now we take the text from the text edit, write it to the text file by doing so. So we say f.write file text. Okay. So now this should work. So actually, let me first show you the demo text. It did not get updated. We did not get the hello world at the end. Now I'm going to run it. I'm going to open up the demo, and then I'm going to come here. I'm going to type hello world, and I'm just going to come here and press save. Now that I've pressed save, I will open up the text file and I will show you that hello world exists here. Perfect. So now let's say I just do new, no more file is open, and I just open up demo again. Here you go. You have this file with these changes. So you can see the contents of this file have been changed. Okay, perfect. So now that we did that, we are done with the save functionality. The save in this first case, as we mentioned, a file is already open, so current path is not none. So what I do is I simply get the new text and I write it to this file. So I wrote the changes to this file. Now, on the other hand, let me actually come here and, sorry, I had something highlighted. Yeah, here we go. If I come here and let me just open up a new file. It's untitled, and I just write some stuff like that. Okay. Well, I want to save it. So I'm just going to go to save. If I come here and I scroll down, okay, I just saw the error. So this should be a function call and not just self.fileAs. Okay, so now let me demo it properly for you. So here, I come here and I press save. If I scroll down, you can see that save file as is clicked. So save file as and not just save file. Why did this get executed when I press save? Let me just do it again for the demo. You can see it got printed again. What's happening here? Well, it checks for self.currentPath. When this is a new file, it's untitled, what happens is there's no path, so it is none, so the else will get executed. Now that the else is executed, what it will do is it will simply call self.saveFileAs. Now that it calls it, what does saveFileAs do? It's simply just a print statement. We haven't actually developed the contents of this save as. Okay, so save is done. We're handling two different cases. We're not going to write any more code in the save. We're now going to write the save as. Okay? One last thing I actually want to change before I do that. I want to, as soon as I launch it, like that, by default, I want the title here to be untitled. So I'm just going to say self.setWindowTitle, and it's going to be untitled to avoid confusion and to let the user know that by default we have a blank text file open and it's not related to any file that we have saved locally. Okay, perfect. Now let's write the code for the save as. So I'm just going to erase this part. Okay, now that I've erased it, how am I going to do the saved as? Well, again, I'm going to actually need a file dialog similar to what I opened up using the open file. So now I'm going to call this path name equals to QFileDialog.get save file name. So previously we did get open file name. Now we're doing get save file name. Now that I've done so, I'm going to then say self as usual. So it's similar to before. I'm going to pass the title to the file dialog, which will be save file. This can be anything you like. So this is your choice to set. Then I want to pass the same path, so the same directory that we're currently working in. So here, and then the default type to save this file will be a text file similar to what we did before. So this is very similar to what we did in the open. And I'll show you exactly, okay, let me close this. I'll show you what they each mean when we run it. So here I'll come to save as, and this will open up a file dialog. Again, the title here is save file. We can only print out text files, as you can see here, and then we would specify the name here for the text file and we press save. Obviously it didn't get saved because we've only written this code which will get the save file name, but now we're going to write the part related to saving. So this is how save as will work. Another thing I want to show you is that now when we have an untitled new file that isn't related to any path, and if I press save, this will also open up the dialog similar to save as. Okay, perfect. Okay, what else do we want to write using the save as? Actually, let me show you the path name that gets outputted. So I'm just going to print path name sub-0. So similar to before how we said file name sub-0, here we have to get the first returned output. So now let's say save as, and I'm just going to call this hi.txt. You can or cannot write the txt part yourself, it doesn't matter. I press enter. If I scroll down here, you can see that the output says the path and then hi.txt. So this is how we would save the file, and this is the name of this file along with the path. Okay. Next thing we want to do is we actually want to create this file and write the contents of our text editor to it. How do I do that? Let me just erase the print statement, and now I will simply say file text, similar to before, it's equal to self.textedit.toPlain text. There we go. So we've saved the file text. Then with open, okay, path name sub-0. So this is the name of our file where we're saving the stuff. Then this will open up in write mode. So as f, and again, what we're going to do is we will just say f.write file text. Okay, so we're writing the contents to this file text. Now let me run it and show you how we will save this file. I'm going to type just some random stuff, come here, save as, and I'm just going to call this hi.txt, press enter. You can see that hi.txt was created here. Okay, so you can see right here that hi was created and contains the same content. This is how we were able to save the file. What else do I want to change? I actually want the window name to be modified, and I want the current path that we're saving to also be updated. So now I will just say self.current path is equal to path name sub-0, and also self.set window title is now equal to path name sub-0. Okay, perfect. Now if I run it, let's say I press Ctrl S now, I'll just write anything and press Ctrl S. Because I press save, but there is no current file, this will open up save as. Now I'm going to call this, anything, .txt. So I can just press enter without writing the .txt myself. Press enter. So the title wasn't changed. Let me actually check what we did. Self.set window title not equal, so this is an error. This should be like this. Okay, my bad. Now let me run it. Write anything, save as. Okay, and then any text name, and you can see that the title was updated to include the file name. Okay, so now we have fully functioning the file new, open, save as. So now we have the basic file management working. We're able to create new files, open existing text files, save as, and have all those functionalities ready while also keeping track of the currently open file and changing the title to suit our file. Okay, perfect. Now, we also have these done, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on the appearance functions. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to code these two different functions. So we're going to set dark mode to change the appearance of our editor. Here we have this nice dark mode, the black background, the gray background, these guys when you hover on them. And you can also set light mode and bring it back to the original default settings. So how are we going to change this? Well, let's actually just take a break from VS Code for now and head back to QTDesigner so I can explain in depth how this styling works. I don't want to just dump some code and then tell you this is how the styling works. Let's go through it step by step and see how the styling works. So one thing you can do in PyQt5 QtDesigner is you can change the style sheet. of different UI elements. For example, I have this text edit. I can change the style sheet and I can say color is red. And now I'm just going to apply. Obviously the color didn't change. Why is that? If I preview it by pressing Ctrl R, you can see that the font itself changed. So color usually means font, and the font itself was changed to be a red color. Now in our case, we want to dynamically change the style sheet using the code. So we'll get to that later on. But for now, let's actually develop the style sheet for our dark mode. Okay, so let me just undo this and bring it back. Let's see. Okay, it's black again. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to change the style sheet for our overall main window. We don't want to do this element by element. So I come here to my main window in my object inspector and I right click and I press change style sheet. So now we're going to write the CSS-like code to style our interface. Here's what we're going to do. Firstly, I'm going to select QWidget. What do I mean by select? Basically here I'm saying style every single QWidget. Now, I'm just going to give this a background color, and this background color will be equal to RGB, and this will be 3333 and 33. Okay, so this is a standard black background color. It's not totally black, but it's close enough. If I press apply, you can see that the entire thing changes. Why? Even though I said QWidget. Well, the reason is, so the QTextEdit, for example, it's a type of widget. So QTextEdit is inherited from QWidget. Therefore, all the QWidgets on the screen that you see right here have been modified. Okay? Perfect. So first we change the background color of the QWidget. I want to add some contrast and change the background color of my QTextEdit. So here I will select QTextEdit. And I will come here and a shorter way to do this is coming here and saying add background color. And here you would write the hex code for your color, or you can say the RGB. Okay? So I'm not going to do this as so. I'm just going to say background color, and then I'm just going to say RGB, and in this case this is going to be 46, 46, and 46. So this will be a slightly more gray color. So now if I preview, you can see that the color is more gray, it's different. You can contrast the Q menu bar with the QTextEdit, so you can see the difference. If I hover over these guys, I can see them. However, for now, I can't really see them. Another thing we have here is if I type, the font is black. So let's keep those in mind as we style the rest. Okay, so another thing, let's actually come here, change style sheet. You can change the font color. So we said color is for the font color. So now if I say FF, so this is white, and I apply, you can see that the font color was changed in the Q menu bar. This is, as we said, everything is a Q widget. So now I can just preview, type here, the font is white, perfect. This is what we wanted. We're almost there. So what's another thing we need? Well, when I hover, because the background is originally white and we're hovering with this almost white color, this is causing us to not be able to see, and it's not very appealing. So what are we going to do? This is what we will do. Again, we'll come back to our style sheet, and this is what we're going to change. So we come here and we say Q menu bar, and then I can specify item selected. Okay? And now I come here and I'm just going to give this the color to be black, because in this case we're hovering with white and I want the color to be black. What did I just do? Let me explain. So let's actually first preview it, make sure it's working. As you can see, now I hover, the background is white, but the text is black, so it's totally readable and it looks good. Okay, so what I did here when I changed the style sheet, this is what I did. I came here and I said, I have the Q menu bar. So we're selecting the Q menu bar, which is this top guy right here. Then I selected the item itself. So the item means that for every single item inside the Q menu bar. And then I said selected. So when it's selected, when I'm hovering over it, when I'm clicking on it, change this color to be black. And 0006 times is black. Okay, so this is the style sheet for my dark mode. Now, I can apply and just leave this here, but then what would happen in the case when I run the app? So now if I come here and I run it, it's going to be dark mode by default and I won't be able to change it back. I want to actually keep it the way it was, but do the changes to the style sheet dynamically through the code. How do I do so? Well, it's a very, very simple function. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo and return my interface to the same style sheet that it was before. Okay, so here in the code, we have these two functions, set dark mode and set light mode. They're blank. I erased the print statements. And now we're going to put the style sheets here. So obviously, we want the style sheet to change whenever we press on one of these functions. I'm going to comment this guy out for now, and I'm going to come here to set dark mode. And I will say the following. I'll say self.set style sheet. Because self itself is the QMain window, so when I set the style sheet right like that, I'm saying set the style sheet for the QMain window, which is the parent widget. So now set the style sheet, and here I'm going to give it a string, and I'm just going to say color is red. Okay, so the same thing that we did before. And let me actually run it and show you. I have an error. Okay, yeah, so we have an error because we commented out the light mode, and we actually were calling it somewhere else. So I'm just going to give it pass, and we'll code it later. So I probably shouldn't have erased the prints. Okay, anyway, so now if I come here and I set the dark mode, you can see that this color was changed to red and the font was changed to red. So this set style sheet function is what will enable me to change the style sheet similar to what I was doing before in QTDesigner. Perfect. So now rather than having color red, what I want to add here is the style sheet of our dark mode. So I'm going to use a multi-line string because this is going to be quite a long string. And you can save this in an external variable. It doesn't really matter. Actually, let me just, okay. And I come here. Let me actually redo my changes and get the style sheet that we wrote. So this is not here. So to main window, we get our style sheet. I copy this guy, so I'm copying it. The same one that we just wrote, that we took a few minutes to actually explain and write. So this same style sheet, I will say cancel, and I will undo this guy right here. Come back to VS Code and paste the style sheet right here. Let me actually indent so it looks better, but essentially this is our style sheet. So the same one that we had written before with all the background colors and the font colors, we copied it into our set dark mode function into where we said self.set style sheet. Now let me run it. I go to appearance and I set dark mode, and as you can see, the dark mode was set, it changed, and it looks good, and this is exactly what we coded before. All right, perfect. So now I actually want to go back to light mode. For now, light mode doesn't do anything, but here's one thing. We don't actually want to write our own style sheet to bring it back to light mode. We want to use the default one, the one we had before we made all these changes. Here's how you can do that. You can come here and you can say self.set style sheet, and rather than passing any style sheet, you just pass an empty string. By passing an empty string, you will be giving it the default settings. So now if I change it to dark mode, then I change it to light mode, it goes back to exactly the way it was before we made any changes to the style sheet. And that's how we were able to add the appearance modification and add both a dark mode and a light mode to our application. All right. We only have one more thing left, and that is changing the font size. The final thing we're going to do is we're going to code changing the font size. Before I do so, there's one thing I actually want to change in the interface. Let's actually head back to PyQt5 Designer. So here in the appearance, I actually want to remove this guy. So I'm going to remove it and actually delete the action from here. Why can't I? Okay, I want to delete the action. And I'm going to add two separate actions here in its place. And I'll explain why in a second. But basically they will be increase font size and decrease font size. Why did I do this? Simply because it made more sense to be able to increase or decrease the font size both ways rather than have one way in which we can change the font size. Okay, so all I did here is very similar to the start of the video where I just added two new actions to my menu. So this menu, I added two new actions. Now here in the code, what I have to do is I have to link these two new functions. So rather than action change font size, I'm going to say action increase font size. I'm going to copy this guy and then paste it Okay, fix the indentation, and then here I'm going to say decrease font size. So now that I've decreased the font size, they're both linked to the same function. I'm just going to change this to be inc and decrease. Okay, perfect. So now when these actions are triggered, we want to connect to these functions. So this, I will change it to be increase font size, and then I will do the same one for decrease. So let me do this one for decrease. Okay, perfect. So all I changed here is I changed, rather than having one action to change the font size, I added two separate actions to increase and decrease the font size. Okay, now if I actually run it, as you can see right here, you have the two guys right here. If I press on this one, it says change font size clicked, and the same statement will be printed if I press on the decrease. Okay, perfect. So how are we going to actually do this dynamically? Well, there is one very simple function we can use, and it's simply self.textEdit. So again, I'm using the text edit that we have, set font point size. So this is the function, and here you have to pass an integer. So I'm going to say 30, just for the sake of example. Now, if I run it, I just type anything. This is our default font. Can go appearance, increase font size, and now if I type, you can see the font size is now 30. I can also highlight the whole thing and increase the font size, and everything gets to be the same size, which is 30. So this is how this function will work. It's super nice, super convenient. All we need to do is allow our user to dynamically modify the font by both increasing and decreasing. How do we do so? Well, this is what we're going to do. We come to our code, and similar to how we were keeping track of the current path, I'm going to say self.current font size. And this current font size will by default be equal to 8, which is very close to what we have by default. And now this font size will be either increased or decreased as we press those buttons. So this is our current font size. I come here in my increase font size function, and what I do is simply self.current font size, and then I will increment it. So I add 1 to it. And here, rather than set it to be a hard-coded 30, I will simply set it as self.current font size. So now let me run it, type some stuff, highlight it. I come here, I increase the font size. You can see it's getting bigger as we increase it. Now we want to do the same for decrease. So we want to decrease it when we press decrease. Again, I will copy paste the exact same code. I will come here, and rather than increment this, I will decrement it, so -1. Now, let me run it, type anything, highlight, and let's say increase, 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 then I can decrease, and you can see that it's gradually getting smaller. So this is how we're able to dynamically increase and decrease our font. Again, this does not depend on whether this is dark mode or light mode. It still works the exact same way. So yeah, that's really it. Now we were able to code all of our functions. We added functionality for every single one of these guys, and we were able to code a separate function for each single one. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. And yeah, leave a comment if you enjoyed, leave a like if you enjoyed, and leave some additional feedback if you have any other comments to give. Thank you again, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.